Chapter 1. Chapter text. Sorry, kid. It ain't gonna happen. The doctor's voice sounded indifferent, even bored. For year-old Izuku felt the all-might action figure slip from his grasp and heard it clatter on the floor, but merely sat, stunned. He didn't have a quirk? None at all? He couldn't fathom it. He heard the doctor explaining to his mother that the X-ray of his foot was the best indicator, and why. He didn't understand what the bones of his toe had to do with anything, and he really didn't care. How could he not have a quirk? Everyone had one. He didn't know a single person who didn't have at least a tiny one. Izuku walked silently alongside his mother as they left Dr. Tsubasa's office and down the crowded sidewalk to the station, where they boarded a train to go home. His mother kept her arm around and tried to talk to him softly, but he didn't hear her. So deep was his shock at what the doctor had said. He couldn't even cry. Not yet. He was only vaguely aware that something was wrong when his mother gave a startled cry of alarm and gripped him tightly by the arm and pulled him from his own seat and into her arms. There was loud clattering and people were shouting as the train rocked roughly from side to side. There was a moment of relief when the train seemed to settle on the tracks and his mother let out a relieved breath. That's why it was all the more jolting when there was a deafening boom. It seemed like the train jumped like a cat pouncing on prey. Then the handful of people in the train car seemed to be floating for a moment. Izuku's stomach felt funny as the lack of gravity took hold, then released as the train car plummeted downward on its side. Everyone flew sideways as the train left the tracks and began to tumble like a rectangular barrel down a hill. Everyone was getting tossed around like dolls, and Izuku felt his mother's arms tighten and her hand press his head against her shoulder. He felt her knees squeeze against him from below as she became a protective ball around him as tightly as she could. His heart was beating very fast now, and he could hear his mother's heart thundering with the ear pressed against her. It was like what Izuku imagined it might be like to take a ride in a tumble dryer as they rolled around with the world and everything in it, spinning around them. There were lots of bumps, and Izuku was scared because his mother was screaming as they fell. They flipped over and fell again, and again, and again. Izuku, he heard his mother say close to his ear once the train became mostly still again. Izuku, are you okay? Her voice was quiet, and she was breathing funny. Okay, Izuku answered, whispering too. I love you, baby boy, she told him, like she did when she tucked him into bed at night. Love you too, he answered, wondering why she was crying. Was she hurt, or just scared? He was scared. He didn't know what was going on, but he could tell that something bad was happening. He hurt pretty much all over from being bumped around, but he didn't want to scare his mother by crying. While he was in pain, it didn't hurt that bad, and he was going to be a hero someday, and heroes never cry. He was trying to think of what he could do or say to make his mom feel better. But then more bad things happened. There was another shudder of the train car then, and then a sharp snap, and a rushing sensation as the train began to slide on its roof down an incline. The seats were where the ceiling should be, and there was broken glass all around them. Izuku could feel something warm and wet on his face, and on the arms wrapped around his mother. The other passengers were all shouting again, but not his mother. She was still wrapped around him, but not as tightly, and she was quiet and calm. Izuku thought she was very brave, not panicking like everyone else. It was then that the train came to an abrupt stop, and Izuku felt something hit him in the head hard enough to make stars float in his vision before everything went black. When Izuku woke up, he thought he must be dreaming. He did feel sleepy. He was in a bed in a white and blue room with bright lights, and Kaken's mom was there, for some strange reason. She looked tired and her eyes were red around the edges, instead of just in the middle like normal. Auntie, Izuku asked, surprised when his voice sounded way too loud in the quiet space. Hey there, Auntie said, reaching out a hand to gently ruffle his hair. Tough day, huh? She picked up something from the mattress that had a red button on it, and pressed the button before putting it back down. Where are we? Izuku asked, using a quiet voice and looking around curiously. There were weird curtains hanging from the ceiling and poles with weird machines on them, and a tube was taped to his arm, and his arm was taped to some kind of board. This is a hospital, Auntie said gently. You got a little banged up in an accident. Izuku tried to remember, but only had blurry memories of riding a train with his mother, and that something strange had happened. I think the train crashed, he finally said, thinking hard about it. That's right, Auntie told him with a wobbly smile. A villain made the train crash. Two people came into the room, then. One was a short man in a blue shirt and pants, with greenish skin and sleek feathers for hair, and the other was a kind-looking woman in a white dress. Well, Midoriya-kun, the man said kindly. It's good to see you awake. You have quite a bump on your head. I do? He asked in surprise, lifting his one unencumbered hand to touch his head. His fingers found the edges of a bandage on his forehead and he patted the soft padding, wincing slightly when he got to a sore spot. Auntie gently steered his hand away from his head and smiled at him softly. You have 17 stitches, the man told him. I'm Dr. Wu. I've been taking care of you since you were brought in. The woman in the white dress was busy with the machines, and then she started to take the tape off of Izuku's arm. Izuku was surprised when she held a cotton ball against his arm and pulled a long piece of plastic out that looked like a needle. She wrapped the spot with a stretchy bandage in bright blue. Where's my mom? Izuku asked, looking around. She was on the train with me. Auntie made a strange sound in her throat, but gave a little cough and said, You can't see her right now, but I'll look after you. Okay? You can come stay at my house for a while and have a sleepover with Katsuki. A sleepover with Kaken? He asked curiously. He'd never gotten to spend the night at a friend's house before. Wow! Izuku felt sleepy still, but the idea of having Kaken all to himself for a whole night was exciting enough to distract him from not being able to see his mom. Yep, Auntie affirmed, sounding like she was getting a cold. You should be able to go back home tomorrow. Kay, Izuku agreed. I don't have to stay here? We've done everything we can for you, young man, Dr. Wu told him with a nod. We'll give Bakugos-san your discharge instructions and you can go with her. Izuku was okay with this. Auntie was nice, even if she yelled a lot. Mostly she yelled at Kaken and she never yelled at him, so he wasn't scared. She helped him get dressed in clothes he didn't recognize, though his shoes were the same light-up all-might sneakers he had been wearing that morning. There was a lot of paperwork that had to be signed, but Izuku was allowed to sleep a little while Auntie filled it out. Then they rode in a taxi back to Kaken's house. Izuku clung to Auntie's skirt as they entered the house, and looked around for any sign of Kaken. Instead, Kaken's dad was standing up from where he'd been on the couch and approaching with a soft smile. Hello, Izuku-kun. Are you hungry? I was just about to call Katsuki down for a snack, he said kindly, looking at his wife with questions in his eyes. Auntie shook her head ever so slightly, and Izuku knew that they were probably communicating the way grown-ups did when they didn't want the kids around to know what they were saying to each other. Yes, please, Izuku said, remembering to be polite. He didn't know how long it had been since breakfast that morning, but his tummy was feeling grumbly. Now. Auntie ruffled his hair again, just as Kaken came thundering down the stairs. Is Mom home yet? He called out as he approached. Hi, Kaken, Izuku said brightly, stepping out from behind Auntie. Izuku. Kaken greeted him. Hey, why are you wearing my clothes? Izuku shrugged and looked down at the red shirt with skateboarding T-Rex on it. I dunno. Your mom brought them. Why do you have a big band-aid on your head? You got an ouchie, Katsuki demanded. Izuku nodded uncertainly, and Auntie came to his rescue. Izuku was in an accident this morning and his clothes got dirty, so I took him some of yours. He got a cut on his head, but the doctor gave him some medicine so it's not hurting right now. He's going to stay here with us, tonight. Cool, Katsuki accepted easily. I can show him the rhinoceros beetle I caught yesterday. Kaken's dad came in a moment later holding a tray with tea and snacks, and set it on the table. Izuku sat across the table from Kaken and grinned at him. Dorayaki, Kaken announced, standing on his chair and grabbing two plastic wrapped treats from the tray and holding them up. Do you want red bean or strawberry? Izuku held out his hand toward the strawberry one, since he knew that red bean was Kaken's favorite. To everyone's great surprise, the strawberry-flavored treat flew from Katsuki's hand and straight into Izuku's waiting one. Whoa, did you get your quirk? Kaken asked excitedly. It's about time. Katsuki! His mother scolded his rudeness before turning to the green-haired boy. It looks like you got your mother's quirk. Izuku, how exciting. When did this happen? I don't know. I never did it before. Izuku cried with wonder. Wow. Do it again, Katsuki demanded, jumping up and down on his chair. Izuku looked to Kaken's parents for permission and wondered why they looked at each other sadly. Wasn't getting a quirk a good thing? The doctor had said he didn't even have one, and now Izuku could see that the doctor was just wrong. Try to float this one over to you, Kaken demanded with a huge grin, holding up the other dorayaki. Izuku concentrated on the other packet and made a waving motion like he'd seen his mother do when she used her quirk. He was delighted when it gently floated over to him. All right, Auntie said indulgently after a moment. Don't overdo it. Eat your snack and then go and play. She picked up the red bean treat and passed it back to her son, and both boys grinned at each other before tearing open the plastic and starting their little feast. Izuku ate 2 dorayaki and then some crackers as well, feeling much better with some food in his tummy. Once their tea was finished, Kaken jumped down and rounded the table to pull at Izuku's arm. Come on, let's go to my room and see what you can do with your quirk. Izuku hopped down and followed, with Auntie calling after them to be careful of Izuku's head wound. The doctor gave me some medicine for you, so if you start getting a headache or feel bad, come tell me. Izuku followed Kaken to his room, where they practiced with Izuku's quirk, by having Izuku pull all kinds of things toward him. His mother had only been able to pull small objects to herself, and it seemed that Izuku was no different. He tried to move a CD player off of Kaken's desk, but all he could do was make it slide a little, and it couldn't hover at all. Well, it's not as good as my quirk, Kaken told him somewhat consolingly, but maybe it'll get stronger if you practice enough. Izuku was feeling tired and sore by the time the boys were called down for dinner. Auntie gave him some medicine that tasted bitter, but gave him some fruit milk to wash it down with, so it was okay. By the time dinner was finished, Izuku was beginning to feel sleepy. When Auntie came to help him and Kaken with their bath and getting into pajamas, he got the first look at his body. Whoa, you're covered in cuts and bruises, Kaken exclaimed excitedly. Izuku looked at shirtless body in the mirror and saw blue and purple bruises in splotches all over his arms. Ice legs looked even worse when he got further undressed, and there were scratches and scrapes all over him, as if he'd had a run-in with a very unfriendly cat with very sharp claws. What happened to you? Kaken asked eagerly, as if he expected to hear about a great adventure. Katsuki, Auntie said in a scolding tone. I don't remember, Izuku said. I was on the train with my mom, and I think it crashed. That's okay, Auntie told him, sounding funny again. The doctor said you might not ever remember, because you hit your head. Let's get you washed up and into the tub, then you can get a good night's sleep. You feel better after a nice soak. You were in a train crash? Kaken sounded amazed, unable to let it go, even with his mother glaring daggers at him. I guess, Izuku said with a little shrug, feeling uneasy for reasons he couldn't quite pinpoint. What happened to your mom? Kaken asked, as if it had just occurred to him that it was unusual for Izuku to be spending the night, right after being in a train wreck. Is she still in the hospital? Katsuki, that's enough. It's time to wash up. Kaken looked at his mother with annoyance, but Izuku had a sudden feeling of guilt. He'd been having fun with Kaken all day, and even found out he had a quirk, and hadn't thought about calling his mom even once. Is my mom hurt too? He asked timidly, afraid of the answer. By that time, Auntie had guided him to a small stool and wash bowl while the tub filled with warm water. She's still at the hospital, she answered softly. She wanted me to take care of you for now, okay? She helped him wash very gently, carefully avoiding his head wound before helping him climb into the tub to soak. A couple of minutes later, Kaken climbed in with him, splashing a bit as he did so. Auntie tidied up the room while the boys enjoyed the warm water. That one's shaped like an alligator, Kaken said, pointing to a long, thin bruise that had blossomed on Izuku's side. Izuku looked down and could kind of see what he meant. It was like looking for shapes in clouds. They could look like animals and things if you thought about it. Do they hurt a lot? Did you cry? Kaken asked curiously. giving the alligator a small poke that made Izuku jump in surprise. "Katsuki, don't jab at him like that," his mother scolded, gathering big, fluffy towels from a shelf. "You'll make the bruises worse." "They hurt a little," Izuku told him honestly, "but it's okay." He looked back at Kaken's mom and obediently got out of the tub and allowed himself to be enveloped in the soft, clean-smelling towel. Kaken was similarly cocooned in his own towel and was using the ends to rub at his wet hair. Next, they dried off before getting into pajamas. Kaken had a new pair of All Might pajamas to show off, and he let Izuku wear his old pair, which had grown just a little too small for Katsuki, but were just right for Izuku. There was a child-sized futon on the floor beside Kaken's bed, and Izuku settled down under the quilt while Kaken climbed onto his mattress and under the covers. Once they were both tucked in, Izuku looked to Auntie. "Will I be able to go and see my mom tomorrow?" Auntie gasped and looked away for a moment, then took a deep breath and said, "I'm not sure, honey. We'll have to wait and see. Sleep well." The lights were turned off as she shut the door behind her, but there was an All Might night light plugged into the wall by the door, so it wasn't too dark. Izuku thought that he and Kaken would stay up, playing and talking, but before he knew it, his eyes were getting droopy, and he fell asleep. Thirst woke him a couple of hours later, and Izuku quietly crept out of the room and went to see if he could get a drink of water. Auntie was in the kitchen talking to Uncle, and they didn't see him at first. "She was the only casualty, apparently," Auntie was saying. "Hisashi said he'd catch the first flight he could book a seat on. He should be here tomorrow, so you might need to go and get him from the airport." Izuku didn't know what casualty meant, but Hisashi was Izuku's dad's name. He knew that because his mom talked to him on the phone all the time, and that's what she called him. "My dad's coming?" he asked sleepily, rubbing at his eyes. "Hey, I thought you were asleep. Are you okay? Did you have a bad dream? Does your head hurt?" Auntie said, sounding flustered. "Thirsty," Izuku said. Uncle immediately went to the cabinet for a glass and filled it with water. "Is my dad coming back?" Izuku asked again. "Yes, he is, little man," Uncle told him, handing him the glass. "He's coming tomorrow. They called him about the accident and he's coming to see you and take care of you." "Wow, Mom will be so happy," Izuku said, feeling a little better about it. He knew Mom missed Dad a lot while he worked far away. Uncle looked like he was about to cry and turned back to the sink. Auntie sniffed and put a hand on his head. "Finish your drink and we'll get you back to bed. Maybe your dad will be here by the time you wake up." Izuku wasn't sure what was going on, but did as he was told. As he settled back under the quilt, he fell asleep hoping that once his father got there, they could go and see his mom together. Izuku was disappointed that his dad wasn't there when he woke up, but Auntie said he was on his way and would be there soon. Taiwan was so far away that his dad couldn't come home on weekends, so it would probably be a long trip. "I never met your dad before," Kaken said as they sat at the table and ate breakfast. Izuku wasn't feeling very hungry and was picking at his eggs instead of actually eating them. His whole body was sore, and his head hurt a lot more than it did yesterday. Auntie had given him some more medicine, but it wasn't working yet. "He works at a place called Taiwan, and he's the boss of a lot of people at a big company," Izuku said, spouting off what he had been told by his parents. "He can't come home too much because he's got a lot of important work, but my mom doesn't want to live there, so she stays here." "Weird," Kaken said with a shrug. After they finished breakfast, Katsuki was very interested to learn that they would not be going to school that day. His parents worked a lot and almost never took random days off without a lot of planning. "First, Izuku needs some time to rest from his accident," Auntie explained, "and it would be boring here by himself, right?" "Right," Kaken answered eagerly. "Can we play video games?" "I think that would be all right," she answered indulgently. Kaken knew exactly how to hook up the game console to the television in the living room. They had played several games of Racecar Pro 4 before they got bored, and changed to a fighting game featuring several prominent heroes, including All Might. Izuku chose to play All Might in his Bronze Age costume, and Kaken chose his Silver Age one. They were happily fighting virtual villains when the front door opened. "I'm home," Uncle said brightly. "Izuku, there's someone here to see you." Izuku turned his head and saw a sight he hadn't seen outside of photographs for months. His dad, a bit on the skinny side, with messy black hair and freckles that matched Izuku's own. He looked exactly the same as always. He was wearing a business suit that looked rumpled, and his tie was undone, and he looked really, really tired. "Dad!" Izuku cried happily. He launched himself at his father without hesitation, wrapping his arms around his neck as the man crouched to gather him up in his arms. "Hi, Zu!" his dad said, hugging him tightly enough to make his bruises twinge with pain. "I'm glad you're back," Izuku said joyfully, not complaining about the discomfort as he rubbed his cheek against his father's stubbly one. "He looks exactly like his dad," Kaken observed to his own father as they watched the reunion. "He sure does," Uncle replied. "Can we go see Mom now?" Izuku asked, turning large worried eyes to his dad. I just saw her," his dad said, sounding like he had a sore throat. "We can go after you, and I have a man-to-man talk if you want." "Okay," Izuku said easily. He wasn't sure what a man-to-man talk was, but it didn't sound so bad. He politely thanked the Bakugo family for taking care of him, and his father did the same before setting Izuku on his feet and taking his hand. Chapter 2. Summary. Izuku discovers that his mother's quirk isn't the only one he has, and Kaken doesn't like that idea at all. Izuku didn't know how his life would ever be the same again. His mother hadn't just been hurt in the train wreck. She had died in it. Dad said that she died protecting him from being hurt, and that she was a hero. Heroes weren't supposed to die. After the funeral, which was something of an emotional blur, Dad had taken Izuku on a long airplane ride to Taiwan, where Izuku had been looked after by an older lady named Shuling that didn't speak any Japanese. It was weird to hear his father speaking Mandarin to other people, too. His dad promised that they would only be there for a few days while he got things here in order so they could move back to Japan. Izuku didn't really like it in this place. His dad lived in a really tall building, but all you could see out the windows were other really tall buildings. He ended up spending all of his time watching unfamiliar cartoons that he couldn't really understand, since he wasn't allowed to go out and didn't know how to tell the woman looking after him if he wanted to do anything. Anyway, he missed home. He missed his mom. Izuku often got tearful when he thought about his mother. Every time his eyes filled with tears, Shuling would give him little squares of nougat and pat his hand gently. He understood that she was trying to comfort him, but it didn't help much. His dad was gone most of the time, and when he came back, he was exhausted and usually went right to sleep, only to be gone again by the time Izuku woke up each morning. The only time Izuku really went out the entire time he was in Taiwan was to visit the hospital to have the stitches in his forehead removed. His father had gone with him for this, and Izuku had been less anxious, but as they were arriving at the hospital, an ambulance arrived and stopped right in front of them. They hurried a man out of the back who was very old-looking, and they were pressing on his chest and calling to others to come and help. Izuku felt a shiver zoom up his spine at the sight, and his father quickly detoured him away from the ambulance entrance to a different door. He sat still on the examination table while a doctor came and carefully removed the bandage over the stitches on Izuku's head. "He says this won't hurt," his dad translated for the doctor. "It might feel a little weird or itchy, though." Izuku nodded and closed his eyes and held his breath. "Izuku what?" his dad asked, sounding alarmed. Izuku opened his eyes and let out his breath in anticipation, when his dad began to speak in rapid Mandarin to the doctor. "Izuku, do you feel okay?" his dad asked, studying him carefully. "Can you do that again?" "Do what?" Izuku asked, feeling puzzled. "What you were just doing," his father encouraged. Izuku obediently closed his eyes, thinking that the doctor was about to pull the stitches out. He held his breath and waited, but no one did anything, so he opened his eyes again and looked at his dad quizzically. "Is he not going to take them out?" he asked anxiously. He had seen the stitches when the bandage had been changed, and they were ugly and black and looked like a centipede marching across his forehead. He wanted them to go away. More Mandarin. "Zu, can you keep your eyes open and hold your breath for me for a few seconds? Like if you were going swimming?" his dad finally asked. Izuku did what he asked, and he could see the doctor and his dad staring at him with interest. Izuku looked down at his knees, and saw that he could see the table he was sitting on through his legs. It was the same with his hands. He had turned see-through. He let out his breath in a whoosh and saw himself go back to normal. Again, his dad said at the direction of the doctor. Hold your breath as long as you can. Izuku sucked in a breath and saw himself turn transparent again. The doctor poked him with the end of a pen, but nothing else happened. Okay, Zu, you can breathe normally now. Has that ever happened before? Izuku shook his head. What did it mean? His dad talked with the doctor in Mandarin again, and after a long conversation that Izuku couldn't understand, his dad sighed. Okay, Zu, he's gonna take your stitches out now. Try not to hold your breath while he does it. Okay? But what about? Izuku began to ask. We don't know, buddy. We'll see the doctor when we get back to Japan and find out. Luckily, they got back on a plane 2 weeks later and returned to Izuku's familiar home, in the apartment he had lived in with his mother before. His forehead was as healed as it was likely to get, according to the doctor in Taiwan. Izuku had a bright pink scar that wasn't much more than a long line from his hairline above his right eyebrow to his left temple. Time would probably fade it from bright pink to more closely resembling his skin tone. All of the bruises had faded by now and physically, Izuku was back to normal. His father dropped him off at school on the Monday morning after they got back to Japan, and the kids all gathered around him, having heard from Kaken that he had a quirk. Now, the teachers exclaimed over him and made a fuss when he showed everyone how he could make a box of crayons float over to him from a nearby table. Congratulations, Izuku-kun, one of the teachers said proudly. Oh, I can do this too, Izuku said, feeling proud of himself as he breathed in deeply and held his breath. Everyone gasped as he turned transparent, clothes and all, until he let out his breath again. Wow! Amazing! How'd you get 2 quirks? Kaken demanded, looking upset. Izuku shrugged. I dunno. It just happened. My dad's gonna take me to the doctor to find out as soon as he can, Izuku said. Well, having 2 quirks is weird, Kaken declared with a pout, and neither of them is as good as mine. Izuku didn't know what Kaken was getting mad about, but he nodded anyway. Kaken's quirk is still the coolest. The other boy seemed to be slightly mollified by this, and the day went on as usual. When it was time for them to go play outside, Kaken approached him and said quietly, I'm sorry about your mom. Thanks, Izuku said, which is what his father always said to people who said that to him. I miss her. Of course you do, stupid. She's your mom. But my mom says it'll be okay, so it will. Kaken seemed absolutely certain of this. Izuku nodded, not knowing what else he could say, and let himself be drawn into games on the playground. After school, Izuku was picked up by Kaken's mom when she came to get Kaken. Your dad said that you should come home with me and Katsuki for a while, until he can make other arrangements for you while he's at work. Won't that be fun? Izuku looked over to Kaken, who looked like it was the first time he was hearing about this new arrangement. For how long? The blonde boy asked. I'm not sure, his mother said with a raised eyebrow. As long as it takes for Midoriya-san to find an after-school program or babysitter that he trusts to take care of Izuku while he's at work. Okay, Izuku said, not sure why Kaken didn't seem excited about it. Thank you. The school wasn't too far from Kaken's house, so they all walked together. Kaken found a stick on the ground and ran ahead, dragging it along the low walls and fences next to the sidewalk. Izuku took Auntie's hand like he used to do when his mother picked him up from school. He didn't even really think about it beforehand as he held onto her fingers and walked quietly next to her. He felt his eyes sting a bit as he remembered that he wouldn't be able to do this with his mother ever again, but held the tears back. Dad said he needed to be brave now. Hey, Kaken said, stomping back to them and pulling Izuku's arm. Izuku was forced to let go of Auntie's hand as Kaken dragged him ahead to look at a dead bug being carried away by a line of ants near the street. Once they got to the Bakugos house, Kaken immediately went to sit at the little table in the kitchen that only had 2 chairs near a window that looked out onto a tiny backyard that was mostly paved, with poles for hanging laundry. Izuku went to sit in the chair across from him, but Kaken shouted at him. No, that's my mom's seat. We have snack together here every day after school. Izuku froze and didn't know what to do. He used to eat his snack and tell his mom about his day when they got home from school too. He knew how important that was, and didn't want Kaken to miss out on his time with his mom because of him. Katsuki, Auntie scolded, sounding angry. What a way to behave! Izuku is our guest. Kaken made an angry sound at them both and crossed his arms across his chest with a glare. I'm sorry, Izuku said, trying hard not to let his voice shake. I didn't know. It's all right, Auntie said in a much softer voice than she'd used for Kaken. You can sit there and have snack time with Katsuki. She put a hand on his mop of curls that definitely needed a haircut and stroked gently. No, he can't, Kaken angrily denied. Izuku faded to transparency and ducked his head, backing away from both of them. Oh my God, Auntie exclaimed. What's happening? Izuku released and sucked in a breath, not realizing that he'd been holding his breath, waiting for a verbal explosion from either Kaken or his mother about everything. Kaken growled, sounding angry or frustrated or both. Sorry, 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 Izuku chanted, wanting everyone to be happy. That happens sometimes. I'm sorry. But I thought your quirk was… Auntie began. Well, he's got 2 quirks now, Kaken snarled, hopping down from the chair and stomping from the room. They could hear his loud, but hasty retreat through the house, up the stairs and the slam of his bedroom door as they stood there in shock. Izuku felt the first tear fall and sniffed, struggling not to cry. Why was everything so hard today? Oh, Izuku! Auntie scooped him up into her arms, even though he was too big to be carried around anymore, and hugged him tightly. You didn't do anything wrong. Kaken's mad at me, he said miserably. He said having 2 quirks is weird. Having 2 quirks is unusual, she corrected him gently. Not weird. Why don't you sit down and have your snack, and I'll go tell Katsuki he needs to apologize. No, don't, Izuku said as she put him on his feet. He'll just get madder. He just wants to have his snack with you. I can go read a book and you can have a snack with him like always. Auntie looked like she wasn't sure what to say to this. She thought about it for a moment and finally decided, how about I fix you something you can eat in the living room? I'll turn on the TV and you can watch cartoons while I go see if I can get Katsuki to come down. Izuku nodded at this solution. This way he would still get something to eat, and Kaken could have his alone time with his mom. He sat on a cushion beside the low table near the couch and Auntie gave him a juice box, some apple slices, cut to look like bunnies, and a handful of rice crackers. There was a cartoon about All Might on that he had seen a dozen times, but loved enough to watch a dozen more, and he thanked her politely. She patted his head and went upstairs, and Izuku ate his snack in contented silence. Auntie stayed upstairs for a long time, so when the cartoon was over, Izuku turned off the television. He sat on the couch with a notebook retrieved from his school bag and doodled for a while until he started to feel sleepy. He didn't even realize he'd dozed off until he was being shaken awake by a rough hand. He opened his eyes to see Kaken standing by the couch, looking at him with a scowl. Mom said to wake you up 'cause it's almost dinner time. She said I have to tell you sorry for earlier, too. Izuku sat up and looked around, surprised that it was already late enough to be dinner time. He didn't know what time his dad would even be done with work, since he was always at work. Is my dad coming to get me? I dunno. Kaken didn't seem inclined to say more than that, but he didn't really seem too mad anymore, either. He just walked away, retreating up the stairs, leaving Izuku where he was. At a loss, Izuku found his way to the toilet and took care of his own pressing needs, and washed his hands extra good since it was almost time to eat. He didn't know if he would be joining the Bakugos family for their meal, or if he would be eating with Dad. When they were in Taiwan, the lady who looked after him had cooked their meals, too. The food had been mostly unfamiliar, but still good. When they had gotten back to Japan a couple of days ago, his dad had bought convenience store food or takeaway for every meal. He was pretty sure his dad didn't know how to cook. There he is, Uncle said with a friendly smile as Izuku wandered into the kitchen. Hello, Uncle. Izuku greeted him the way his mother had taught him he should greet people. Kaken said it was almost dinner time. Is my dad coming to get me now? Auntie looked over her shoulder from where she was preparing bowls of rice on the counter. He called and said he was going to be a little late. She told him with an apologetic smile. So we get to keep you here a bit longer. I hope you like curry. Izuku did. Kaken didn't make another appearance until he was called for dinner, and everyone gathered around the dining room table. Izuku waited until he could tell where everyone would sit before timidly taking the remaining chair for himself. Auntie sighed, and she and Uncle gave each other another of those looks that adults give each other that mean something. Auntie glared a bit at Kaken, then, and the other boy scowled. What? I did what you said. Auntie sighed again, but smiled warmly at Izuku as she put a plate of delicious-smelling curry. Thank you, he said brightly. It looks so yummy. Both grown-ups chuckled. Kaken banged the handle of his spoon on the table and said, It smells great. I'm glad you think so. Enjoy, Auntie told them. Ita de kamasu. Both boys dug in eagerly. Izuku carefully scooped up some rice, then some curry and blew on it before putting it in his mouth. Kaken stirred up everything on his plate until the rice and curry were indistinguishable from each other, and then scooped up a mouthful and ate it without checking to see if it was hot. Both boys made noises of appreciation as they got their first taste. After everyone had gotten a few bites of their dinner inside of them, Uncle turned to Katsuki and asked, How was school today? It was okay, I guess. There was a frog near the bird feeder outside that ate a dead bug, and the class guinea pigs got into a fight again. How was your first day back, Izuku-kun? He asked after listening to Kaken. Okay, Izuku said quietly, taking a drink of the water by his plate. He wasn't sure if he should say more, since it had been a very emotional day for him, and wasn't sure if he could explain how, even if he wanted to risk making Kaken mad again. Kaken had been cranky all day, but he did like it when he was praised. Kaken and I played Otetama during outside time. Kaken won, like always. He's really fast. You're just too slow, Kaken said, but not in a mean way. The lighter atmosphere helped Izuku relax, and Kaken began to talk more about things at school. He seemed happy to have the attention on him, so Izuku concentrated on finishing his curry. He had just finished his last bite when the doorbell rang. That's probably Hisashi, Auntie said, getting up and moving out of the room. May I please be excused? Izuku asked Uncle. Uncle seemed a little surprised by Izuku's formality, but smiled at him and nodded. Of course. Thanks for the meal, Izuku said as he climbed from his chair and went to see his dad. His dad looked tired, and was in the middle of apologizing to Auntie for being so late. Auntie packed up some curry for his dad to take home for his dinner, and Izuku collected his notebook and school bag. They decided to walk, even though it was at least 30 minutes away by foot. Izuku was happy to have time with his dad, who was so busy all the time. His dad said it was nice to stretch his legs after a long day in the office. How was school today, Zu? His dad asked as they walked. I'm sorry I forgot to tell you that Bakugos-san was going to pick you up. Did you have fun? He let Izuku carry the bento with the curry in it, and he carried his bag with his computer and work stuff. I don't think Kaken likes having me there very much. He got mad at me for having another quirk. He said it's weird. That brat, his dad muttered quietly. He patted Izuku on the head with a smile and consoled him. He's probably just jealous because you're lucky enough to have an extra. Maybe he said that neither one of mine is as cool as his. He's right about that, but I still like them. Your quirks are amazing, Zu. So are you. I am so proud of how you've been handling everything that's happened this last month. I'm sorry I haven't been around as much as either of us would like, but I'm working on it. Izuku felt the little knot that had been residing in his chest for most of the day loosen a little after hearing his father praise him. I've got my assistant researching to find someone who can look after you while I'm at work, so you can be at home, at least. I gave her a list of things we need them to be able to do, like cooking and cleaning and taking good care of you, his dad continued. Like Mom used to do? Izuku asked, a little worried. No one can take your mother's place, Zu. I know that better than anyone, but I'm useless at housework, and you're not old enough to stay by yourself until I get home. We need help. He said it gently, and sounded as sad as Izuku felt about it. Izuku knew he was right, but there had been so many changes lately that he felt lost. Maybe his dad did too. I know, Izuku said with a nod. Is there anything in particular you think someone looking after you should be able to do? Izuku gave it some thought before he answered. They should like All Might and heroes as much as me. His dad laughed at that and said, I don't know if anyone loves heroes as much as you do. The rest of the walk home was nice as Izuku chatted with his dad. He believed it when his dad said that everything would be okay, soon. The next day at school, Kaken seemed to be feeling better, especially since the teachers praised his ability to read some kanji that none of the other kids had even started to try learning. Most were still learning hiragana and some katakana. This put Kaken in a good mood, and Izuku was able to play and participate like normally without walking on eggshells. After school, Izuku was careful not to infringe on Kaken's time with his mother, saying that he wasn't hungry and didn't want a snack. Instead, he said he was tired and pretended to sleep on the couch for a while, happy when he heard Kaken and Auntie in the kitchen chatting about their day. When enough time had passed, Izuku woke up, and he and Kaken were allowed to go down the street to the little park that had a small stream and some trees. Kaken brought his net and a little container, in case they found any good beetles. 2 other boys from the neighborhood were there already, looking bored. Hey, Tsubasa said when he saw Izuku. You're Midoriya. My mom heard from Bakugos' mom that you have 2 quirks. That's a lie, right? Nobody has 2 quirks, stupid? A boy called Onaga said, shoving Tsubasa with his elbow. It's true, Izuku said. It's weird, Kaken said immediately. Prove it, Onaga demanded, pointing at Izuku. Izuku reached out a hand and pulled a stick from the nearby grass to his waiting hand, and grinned. That's 1, Tsubasa said. What's the other one? Izuku glanced over at Kaken, and saw he was scowling again. He remembered what his father said about jealousy. It's not really that great, he said carefully. He paused, then held his breath. He didn't feel anything in particular, but could tell by the interested response from the others that he was now transparent. Whoa, Onaga said. He really does have 2 quirks. Cool. You mean weird, Kaken corrected with a snort. Anyway, Izuku said with a shrug, that's them. I don't know why I've got 2. 'Cause you're a freak? Kaken supplied with a roll of his eyes. The other 2 boys looked back and forth between Izuku and Kaken, before nodding slowly. Weird, Tsubasa agreed. Weird, Onaga parroted. It might be cool if they were better quirks, though. Kaken looked satisfied by this, and picked up a stick and wrote his name in the soft dirt beside the sidewalk. That distracted the others, and they began drawing with sticks on the ground. Izuku watched in amazement as Kaken wrote all of their names in kanji. Look, Kaken said, writing Izuku's name in the dirt. This can also be read as Deku. That means useless, just like his quirks. The other boys laughed, and Izuku dropped his stick. That's mean, Kaken. I'm only telling the truth, came the spiteful answer. What's the matter, Deku? You mad that you've got 2 quirks, and they're both stupid? I'm going to go back, Izuku said. He turned away as the other boys started chanting, Deku, Deku. You'd better not go crying to my mom, or you'll be sorry, Kaken called after him warningly. Izuku didn't look back as he ran back to the Bakugos' house. Why was Kaken being so mean? He sat on the front step of the house, not sure if he should knock or just go inside. Would he get in trouble for not staying with Kaken? Would Kaken get in trouble for not staying with Izuku? If Kaken got in trouble, then he might be even meaner to Izuku. He didn't want that to happen. He wanted Kaken to be his friend. He wasn't sure how long he sat outside trying to figure out how to be friends with Kaken without making him mad. But eventually the front door opened and Auntie was standing there, looking concerned. Izuku, I thought you went to the park with Katsuki, she said, holding out her hand to help him up. I did, he said, proud that he hadn't been crying about it. I didn't want to do what the other boys were doing, so I came back. Auntie didn't look convinced but didn't question him about it, either. She looked down the street toward the park, where she could just see the trees and benches from where she stood. Well, come on inside. You didn't have your snack before, Do you feel hungry now? Izuku did. He sat at the table in the kitchen and had some juice and some melon bread while Auntie sat in the other chair with a laptop in front of her and a pair of reading glasses perched on her nose. I got a message from your dad, she told him as he munched. He said he should be able to pick you up just before dinner time today. Okay, he said agreeably. He said he's trying to find someone to look after me, so you don't have to. I don't mind looking after you, she told him with a soft smile. Kaken does, Izuku said simply. I don't think he likes me here. He's used to being the only one here and getting all of the attention, Auntie said wisely. He'd get used to it. Is he being mean to you? Izuku didn't like to lie, but he also didn't like Kaken to be mean to him, which is what would happen if Izuku complained about it. My dad says he's just jealous. Your dad is right, Auntie said with a sigh. But that doesn't mean he gets to pick on you. If he does, you come and tell me about it so I can talk to him. Okay? Okay, Izuku said non-committally. After his snack was finished, he went to the living room and picked out a book to look at from a little bookshelf. It had lots of pictures and appeared to be a story about a shark. He sat on the couch and opened it in his lap, trying to read some of the hiragana, with only a little success. Can you read that, Izuku-kun? Auntie asked, sitting beside him and setting her computer on the table. Only a little, he confessed. I like the pictures, though. Would you like me to read it to you? Izuku nodded and sat close to Auntie so he could see the pictures while she read the story. He was feeling a little sleepy for real and leaned his head against her while he listened. When the door crashed open and Katsuki came in and saw them, he fisted his hands and shouted at Izuku. Hey, that's my book. Katsuki, Auntie shouted at him. How dare you? Kaken didn't even take off his shoes as he stomped over and grabbed the book off of his mother's lap, throwing it across the room. Izuku scrambled up and backed away from the furious glare and the sparks he could see popping in Kaken's hands. He was really mad. I'm sorry, Izuku said timidly, tears springing to his eyes. I didn't mean to. Stupid Deku. Go home. This is my house, not yours. She's my mom, not yours. Your mom is dead. Kaken froze as the words left his mouth, as if he knew that he'd gone too far. It also might have had something to do with the fact that Auntie had slapped his cheek right after he said it. Everyone stood there, stunned for a moment. The slap hadn't been super hard, but it had been jarring, just the same. I hate you, Kaken shouted with tears in his eyes. He shoved Izuku out of his way as he ran past to scurry up the stairs to his room and slammed the door. Izuku fell down from the force of the blow, which had been aided by too many explosions from the palms of Kaken's hands. His shirt had a pair of scorch marks on it, though his skin didn't feel burned. Izuku was too stunned to even cry. Izuku-kun, are you okay? Auntie kneeled down in front of him and helped him stand up. She inspected his shirt and the skin underneath to make sure he wasn't too hurt, then pulled him into a hug, rubbing his back. I'm so sorry he said those horrible things, she said with tears in her own eyes. Izuku just nodded and stood very still in her embrace. He would not risk clinging to her as he wanted to, in case Kaken came back and saw. I'm sorry I made him mad, Izuku said, trying to make things better. No, Izuku-kun, you don't apologize for this. This is not your fault, not even a little bit. It's mine and it's Katsuki's. She told him firmly. I've spoiled him far too much. You hit him, Izuku said. His tone was not accusatory, but surprised. His own mother had never raised a hand to him, though he couldn't ever recall being as hateful as Kaken before, either. Maybe she would have spanked him if he'd been bad enough? He couldn't imagine it, though. I did, she agreed, sounding sad. I probably shouldn't have. I'll go and talk to him about it once we've both had time to settle down. A little. Okay, he said, not sure what to say to that. They both stayed there for a moment, staring at each other awkwardly. How about I turn on a movie for you to watch? She suggested at last. Okay, he agreed, for lack of anything better to say. She turned on an animated movie and he sat on the floor in front of the television obediently to watch, not making a sound and not moving from that spot. He could hear her talking on the phone a few minutes later, telling someone about what had just happened with Kaken, and hoped that there wouldn't be even more trouble when Uncle came home. Izuku quietly watched the movie about a boy who lived with a pirate in outer space, and was surprised when his father showed up before it was even halfway over. He got up and ran to him, throwing his arms around his dad's legs and squeezing tight. "Thanks for everything, Mitsuki," he said to Auntie. "Sorry to have caused so much turmoil for your family." "Inko was my friend," Auntie said, using Izuku's mom's name. "It's the least I could do. I'm sorry it turned out this way. Izuku is a sweet, sweet boy." The next day, Izuku went to a different school, one that stayed open very late for kids whose parents worked late. He didn't go back to Kaken's house again. Chapter 3. Summary. Izuku makes new friends, gets a new babysitter and a new quirk. Then he learns more about why. Keep an eye out in the chapter for a little cameo by someone you might recognize. Izuku's new school was nice. He made some new friends and flourished without the added stress of everyone knowing that his mother had recently died and treating him differently because of it. The days were long, because sometimes his dad didn't get off of work until after dark. But the staff were nice. He met a girl with pink hair and funny eyes that was always hogging the Lego set, but she was nice, if she happened to notice you. The other kids didn't make a big deal about Izuku having two quirks, and it was easy to fit in and relax in a way he hadn't been able to at his old school. A few weeks later, Izuku's dad finally took him to see the same doctor that had told him before that he didn't have a quirk, to find out why he now had two. Izuku didn't see why they needed to see a doctor about it, but his dad said he wanted to be sure it was nothing to worry about. Dr. Tsubasa had been very surprised to find that Izuku had manifested a quirk at all, and expressed sympathy at the death of Izuku's mother. He questioned them about the circumstances surrounding each manifestation, and made some notes, but in the end, he didn't have much to add to what they already knew. "His case is pretty unique," the doctor told Izuku's dad. "Usually when a person has more than one quirk, it's either because the child got each of his parents' quirks, or something linked to them. It would make sense, for example, if he was able to breathe fire and then pull it back to himself. That sort of thing. Telekinesis and turning transparent are completely different and unrelated to each other. There's no one on either side of your family who can disappear or phase through objects or anything like that. Not as far as I know. Inko's parents passed away in an accident when she was in her teens, and my own parents are gone as well. I don't know much more family history beyond that." Izuku sat, incredibly bored, while the doctor nodded and made more notes. The office was a bit cold, and he shivered a bit, hoping that they were almost done. "From what you've told me, there doesn't seem to be anything worth worrying about. Nature sometimes produces an outlier, and Izuku-kun is otherwise a healthy boy. Unless anything else develops, I don't think you need to worry too much. If something does develop, please contact me right away. From a clinical standpoint, his case is really quite interesting." His dad had seemed relieved to know there was nothing particularly wrong, and dropped Izuku off at school to finish out the day while he went back to work. The peace lasted only a couple of hours before something strange happened. "What do you think about my new baby?" Mei asked Izuku as she presented her latest Lego creation for inspection. It was a real working claw that she had rigged up with some rubber bands and levers and wheels from a huge bucket of Lego pieces that were scattered around the area. Izuku looked up from his own creation, which was a simple car and not very interesting. "That's amazing, Mei-chan. But why is this one blue? It should be red like the rest." Izuku tapped the odd blue plastic brick in the middle of the claw, and it instantly changed from blue to red, to match the rest of the creation. "How'd you do that?" Mei demanded, putting her hands on her hips and staring down at him. Izuku shrugged. "I just touched it and it changed color." "Do it again. Change this one red too," she demanded in a bossy tone. Izuku touched the brick she held out to him and blinked when it changed from yellow to red. "Make this one black," she said, shoving another plastic brick at him. He did. Other kids began to gather around and make innocent demands, too. "Turn this green. Can you make this purple?" One of the teachers came over to see what was going on and was surprised to see Izuku changing classroom toys to different colors. She called another one of the teachers over. "Izuku?" the head teacher asked, kneeling down next to him. Were you able to do this before? Izuku shook his head, but was grinning at his newfound popularity. Your daddy took you to the doctor today to find out about your other quirks, right? She asked, sounding curious. He nodded. The doctor said don't worry about it. Did he see you change things to a different color? She asked. He said, shaking his head. I couldn't do it then, just now. The two teachers looked at each other with raised eyebrows. They took him to another small room where they asked him to change a few different things to different colors. He was able to change plastic things and crayons, but not fabric, rocks, metal, or glass. He couldn't change skin or hair, either. There was no detail work. When the color changed, the entire object changed, regardless of how many colors it had been before. They made some notes and then told him he could go back and play, but not to change any more toys without permission. No one seemed upset that he now had 3 quirks, though they did tell him he wasn't supposed to use any of them without permission. That was the rule for everyone. When his dad picked him up later, he asked him how he felt, and questioned him a bit about his new quirk, but didn't seem too upset, either. Mostly he seemed confused. I'll call Dr. Tsubasa tomorrow and see what he has to say, his dad said. 2 days later, Izuku was back in the doctor's office, and this time it wasn't as easy and boring as just sitting there while the adults talked. This time there was a needle that sucked some of his blood out, and x-rays of his whole body, and noisy machines in big tunnels and all kinds of people poking and prodding at him for a really long time. By the time his dad was allowed to take him home, he was tired and cranky. It didn't help when the doctor had said that they would need to return for the test results in a few days before he could tell them anything. At dinner that night, which his dad had ordered to be delivered, his father looked almost as tired and cranky as Izuku did. It's been a long day, huh? He asked Izuku as he transferred a portion of fried rice onto Izuku's plate. Izuku nodded and poked at his food moodily. I might have some good news, though. Saki, my assistant, thinks she might have found someone to come and look after us. I'm going to meet them tomorrow, and if I like them, then you'll get to meet them and we'll decide together. Okay. Izuku wasn't sure what to think about that. Can they cook? He asked. The food on his plate wasn't bad, but he was tired of eating out of cartons and paper wrappers. That was one of the biggest requirements on the list, his dad promised solemnly. Okay. 3 days later, Izuku was playing in his room when the doorbell rang and his father called to him. He ran out to the living room to see a young man standing there wearing a high school uniform. The high school guy waved at him with a friendly smile and Izuku waved back shyly. Izuku, this is Tanaka-san. He's a senior in high school and wants to be the one looking after us a while. Come on in and meet him. Izuku came over and politely greeted Tanaka as he'd been taught to. Tanaka knelt down on the carpet in front of Izuku and smiled. I'm pleased to meet you, Izuku-kun, he said in a nice voice. Do you have any questions for me? Izuku looked questioningly at his father, who nodded in encouragement. His dad had told him that it was up to him to decide if he liked the person that wanted the job, since Izuku would be the one spending the most time with him. Are you a good cook? Izuku asked first of all. I think so, Tanaka answered confidently. My mom taught me how. My specialty is Hamburg steak, though I can make lots of other stuff. Izuku nodded thoughtfully. He liked Hamburg steak. Do you have a quirk? Was the next question. Izuku was always interested in people's quirks. As soon as he learned to write better, he was going to make a book about them. I do, but it's not terribly impressive, Tanaka said. Watch. The young man pulled a little bottle of soap bubbles from his bag and held it up. What is your favorite animal? He asked. Octopus, Izuku said, just naming one off the top of his head. He didn't really have a favorite. Tanaka took out the bubble wand and blew through the soapy ring, and to Izuku's amazement, a bubble shaped like an octopus floated out of it and into the air. It hovered for a while before it popped, and Izuku clapped his hands. That's so cool. Can you do any shape? Mostly, Tanaka said, but animals are the easiest. Wow. Any other questions? He asked, tucking the bottle away in his bag again. Do you like heroes? I love heroes, especially All Might, Tanaka said, scoring big points with Izuku. Are you married? Izuku asked. He didn't really have a particular reason for asking, other than that he didn't really know what he should ask beyond what he already had. Tanaka laughed. It was a nice laugh. No, I don't even have a girlfriend, he answered cheerfully. Most high schoolers don't get married until after they grow up some more. Izuku looked at his dad. I like him. He's good. Do you have any questions? I already asked him lots and lots of questions before, his dad said with a small smile. I had to make sure he could do the job and be on time and everything, you know? Good thinking, Izuku said with a firm nod. This seemed to amuse both men. I think you've got the job if you're comfortable with it, his dad told Tanaka. Thank you, sir. I'm sure Izuku-kun and I will get along just fine. So, Izuku, tomorrow your dad will take you to school, and then I'll pick you up from school when I'm done at my school, and I'll bring you home and stay with you until your dad gets home. How does that sound? Great, Izuku said, bouncing on the balls of his feet a little. Things were looking up. When Izuku was taken to the doctor to get the results of all of his tests, he was glad when they promised him that he wouldn't have to have any more blood taken or lay in any machines. He sat next to his dad as the doctor explained. The tests didn't show any stress to his system, which is the most important thing, he said as he looked over the papers in Izuku's file. The human body isn't normally equipped to handle multiple quirks, and there can be some backlash when more than one manifests. But there's no sign of it in Izuku. I have a theory about him that I would like to test, but I will have to do a small amount of research and wait for the right opportunity. First. What kind of theory? Izuku's dad asked. Izuku had whimpered a little, and scooted over to hold his dad's arm at the mention of another test. I believe that your son actually has 4 quirks, not 3. Explain, was the only thing his dad said, even as he put a protective arm around Izuku's shoulders. From everything you've told me, each one of the quirks he's demonstrated has manifested after he spent time in a hospital. Dr. Tsubasa pointed out, ticking them off on his fingers. The first was after the train accident, the second was after you took him to get his stitches removed at the hospital in Taiwan, and the third just after an appointment here with me. Yes, but he didn't get a new one when he was here for all of those tests a few days ago, his dad pointed out. Izuku didn't understand what they were talking about. What did being in a hospital have to do with getting quirks? No, but I checked the records and no one died here during the time period that he was here for the tests. Izuku looked at his dad, who had gone very still and quiet. Someone did pass away in this hospital during the time of the appointment after he received the color-changing quirk, Dr. Tsubasa continued, and they also had a color-changing quirk. Oh shit, Izuku's dad said, earning him a look of shock from Izuku. Dad, you said a bad word. Sorry, little man. Please excuse my bad language, his dad said. I think you see where I'm going with this, the doctor said. But perhaps we should talk more about it privately? Yes, of course. I wouldn't want him to. The doctor picked up the phone and asked a nurse to come in. She arrived within a minute, and Izuku was surprised when the doctor asked her to take him to get an ice cream in the cafeteria while he spoke privately with the patient's father. Izuku's dad told him it was fine, and that he should go with the nice lady for a few minutes. He would come and get him after he talked to the doctor. Izuku slipped off the chair and took the nurse's offered hand. She was a nice lady who said she had a little girl just Izuku's age. She chatted with him as she took him down a couple of long hallways to a little place that was kind of like a restaurant and got him a cup of ice cream that came with a little wooden spoon to scoop it out with. He shivered a bit as the ice cream made him feel cold. But it was tasty. She got one for herself as well, and they shared a small table in the busy space until Izuku's dad showed up and said it was time to get him to school. On the drive back in the car that his dad got just a couple of weeks ago from his company, Izuku waited for his dad to say something. When his dad didn't really talk at all, Izuku prompted him. Did the doctor find out something bad about me? He asked. No, not bad, just confusing, his dad told him. His dad smiled, but it didn't look like a real smile. He's still trying to figure things out. He said I needed another test. Not the kind you had before, his dad said. I'm not convinced you even need that test, so I'm gonna wait and see. Don't worry about it. Okay? Okay, Izuku said, unconvinced. His dad dropped him off at school just before lunchtime, and things were fine for all of 5 minutes. The children were all served a tray with grilled fish, mixed veggies, and sweet potato miso soup. Hana-chan got upset at this for some reason and began to cry. She was a bit of crybaby over very small things, and no one could figure out why until Izuku spoke up. She's sad because she wanted fried tofu for lunch, he told the teacher. She told you she wanted fried tofu? She asked him. No, she just does. Sorry, Hana-chan, you have to eat fish today, he said consolingly. Maybe your mama can make you fried tofu for dinner. Hana-chan sniffed, but stopped crying. She makes the best fried tofu. I want to eat it right now. Hana was eventually coaxed into sitting down with everyone else, and lunch could continue. The head teacher came to sit by Izuku, as she did a lot of days, and started to talk to him while they ate. How did you know that Hana-chan wanted fried tofu for lunch? She asked curiously. Izuku shrugged. I dunno. I could just tell. Takashi wishes he could have daifuku right now, Izuku said, pointing to one of the boys at another table. You want a Kit Kat? She blinked at him in surprise, but listened to him tell her all about what each person sitting around him wanted to eat. The kids nearby confirmed what he guessed, saying things like, yeah, curry would be really good. I wish we were having that today. And he's right, I like the other miso soup better. Izuku finished his own lunch without complaint. He liked the school lunches most of the time, but Tanaka-san hadn't been lying when he had said that his hamburg steak was very good. He preferred his babysitter's food over the school food. Tanaka-san picked him up at school just like he did every day now. They walked the short distance to the bus stop, where they got on and rode for 10 minutes to another stop that was a 5-minute walk to the Midoriya's apartment. Tanaka-san made him a fruit sandwich for his snack, cutting it into neat triangles on the plate. While Izuku ate, Tanaka took care of the laundry from the day before and vacuumed the living room and bedrooms. Izuku climbed on a stool near the counter after that and helped Tanaka-san prepare veggies and things for cooking. Izuku washed the rice and helped dry dishes when they got washed. Tanaka talked to Izuku while he prepared items for breakfast that could be easily warmed up in the morning. Izuku liked hearing about Tanaka-san's day at school, as he explained about how his class was planning what they would do for their culture festival. It sounded like a lot of fun. Izuku liked how Tanaka-san didn't treat him like a little kid, and asked him questions and explained things to him when he asked. If he didn't know the answer to something Izuku wanted to know, he would look it up on his phone, and they would learn about it together. After the chores were finished, Tanaka-san checked Izuku's school bag for the folder that got sent home every day with any notes from the teacher. This was something he checked on, to be sure he didn't need to prepare anything that might be needed the next day at school, like a smock for painting or anything like that. Izuku-kun, Tanaka-san asked after reading the note the teacher had written. Can you tell me what I want to eat right now? A spicy tuna roll, Izuku immediately supplied from where he was sitting, writing in this notebook, with extra wasabi. Tanaka-san laughed at this answer, which puzzled Izuku, because it wasn't really funny. Do you know what your dad wants for dinner? He asked next. Izuku thought about it for a minute, then shrugged. I dunno. He likes most of the stuff you make. Very cool, was all Tanaka-san said to that. They ate dinner together, though it wasn't a spicy tuna roll, because they didn't have the ingredients. It was still very tasty, and they saved a big plate for Izuku's dad for when he got home. After dinner, Tanaka-san supervised Izuku's bath and then blow-dried his hair for him before helping him get ready for bed. By then, Izuku's eyes were drooping and he fell asleep almost immediately after a long, strange day. Izuku woke in the morning to find his father already awake and dressed, warming breakfast in the microwave when Izuku came into the kitchen. Good morning, his dad said when he saw Izuku come in and sit down at the table. Breakfast will be ready in just a minute. Izuku already knew that there would be rolled omelette, salad, and rice with instant miso soup. He had helped Tanaka-san prepare it, after all. I talked to your teacher yesterday, his father said, setting a glass of milk on the table in front of him. She says you have an interesting new talent. Izuku looked at him, feeling puzzled. I do. It was his dad's turn to look puzzled. She said you were telling her all about what everyone wanted to eat for lunch yesterday. Naokuen said that you were right about what he wanted to eat yesterday, too. Who's Naokuen? That's Tanaka's name, his dad supplied. Can you tell what I want right now? Coffee, Izuku said, with cream, and one of those fancy rolls with jam on it. I'll be damned, his dad said. Dad, that's a bad word, Izuku scolded. Sorry, his dad chuckled. I was just surprised. You're absolutely right. I shouldn't say words like that. The rest of the day was normal, and nothing unusual happened for over a week. It wasn't until a Friday evening that his dad brought up his new talent again. I talked to Dr. Tsubasa, he told Izuku as they enjoyed some shortbread that Tanaka-san's mother had sent to them via their son. He thinks that being able to tell what people want to eat is probably actually another quirk. That would be a dumb quirk, Izuku said with all of the disdain an almost 5-year-old could muster. Dr. Tsubasa said that someone who was at the hospital recently had the same quirk, and they ran a pretty successful little restaurant. I'm sure it came in handy to know what the customers there wanted. I guess that makes sense, Izuku conceded. But I don't want to be a cook. I want to be a hero, like All Might. His dad poured himself some coffee from the small pot he'd made earlier and added some creamer. All Might, huh? Those are some pretty big shoes to fill. Though at the rate you're collecting quirks, who knows? The last part was murmured, as if he wasn't really talking to Izuku. Izuku took a mental count. He had his mom's quirk, the see-through one, the changing color one, and now the food one. Do I really have 4 quirks now? He asked. If your doctor is to be believed, you might have 5. 5? What's the other one? It's complicated, his dad told him with a soft sigh. He got the food on the table and sat down across from Izuku, sipping his coffee while Izuku picked up his chopsticks. Dr. Tsubasa thinks that you're getting quirks from people who die when you're nearby. Izuku frowned in concentration as he tried to make sense of what that might mean. I don't get it, he finally said. I don't really understand it either, kiddo, his dad said, setting down his mug. Does that mean I stole people's quirks? Did I steal Mom's? Izuku asked, suddenly feeling guilty and panicked. No, his father assured him quickly. You didn't steal anything, Zu. Your own quirk just kind of collects the quirks that get left behind when people die and don't need them anymore. I think. Izuku was very confused. Think of it like, when you go to the beach and pick up a shell, his dad explained. Where did that shell come from? Something used to live in there, right? Izuku thought about this, then nodded. Is collecting the shells a bad thing to do? His father asked. No, Izuku said, still considering the matter. Why not? His father prompted. Because the things that lived in them are gone. They died and don't need them anymore, Izuku guessed. Right, so if a person dies and doesn't need their quirk anymore, how can it be a bad thing to collect it if you can? I know you're not doing it on purpose. It just seems to happen. It might become a bad thing if you get too many quirks because that's just too much for one person to handle. So far, you've gotten pretty small quirks that don't use up a lot of your energy to use. Izuku thought he understood, but it was still complicated. I have a quirk collection? Exactly, his dad confirmed, seeming relieved. And we don't want that collection to get too big. Just like you don't have room for every shell, your body might not have room for every quirk it wants to collect. We don't know what would happen to you if you got too many. But I can't help it, Izuku said seriously. What do I do? Well, for now we are going to keep you away from places that we know people die pretty often, like hospitals and nursing homes. Other than that, there isn't much else we can do except try to be careful. Okay? Izuku wasn't sure how this was any kind of plan. He'd gotten 4 quirks from people without even knowing they died. How was he supposed to be careful? How often did people die anyway? It was a lot to think about. Another thing to think about is that you have a birthday coming up. You should think about how you'd like to celebrate. We can have a little party or go out to eat or see a movie. And you can pick out your own gift, too. Really? Izuku asked, allowing himself to be distracted from the conversation about death. Chapter 4. Summary. Izuku meets a man that has a quirk kind of like his, almost has an accident and doesn't, and meets a lot of animals. Chapter text. Izuku's 5th birthday was the best. He got all kinds of All Might toys and clothes from his dad, and even light-up shoes. They had a small party for him at school, and Mei-chan gave him an invention she made that actually worked like an auto slingshot, but his dad confiscated it almost right away when he almost broke a window. When Tanaka-san picked him up from school, instead of taking him straight home, he took Izuku to a small cafe where they met a couple of his friends. One of which was a pretty girl named Nana that made Tanaka-san blush when she talked to him and giggled a lot. They all gave Izuku a lot of attention and bought him a whole parfait. Just for him. They were really nice. Izuku still missed his mom. She used to make him a special cake and let him stay up late, but everyone else worked really hard to make the day special for him in other ways. It wasn't until a month after his birthday that anything out of the ordinary happened. Izuku was at school when a tall man with white hair in a casual suit came to talk to the teacher, and Izuku got called into the head teacher's office to talk to him. The teacher told Izuku that the man was someone called a counselor, and was there to talk to him about his quirks. Izuku sat in a big chair that the parents usually sat in when they came to talk to the head teacher, so his legs didn't hang over the edge of the seat much. "Hello, Midoriya-kun," the man said with a kind smile. "Hello. What's a counselor?" he asked curiously. "It's someone who talks to you about things, and sometimes helps you figure out what to do about problems. I heard from my friend Dr. Tsubasa that you have a very interesting quirk. I came to talk to you about it." "I got lots of quirks," Izuku said. "Yes, I've heard," he said with a nod and a small smile. "You were told how unusual that is, weren't you?" Izuku nodded. "My dad says I have a quirk that makes me collect other quirks." "I think your dad is right," the man tells him with a nod of his own. "Dr. Tsubasa says that you now have 5 quirks, including the one that helps you collect new ones." "Yep, I got my mom's quirk to pull stuff to her, but only little things. I can change plastic stuff to a different color if I touch it, I can turn see-through, and I can tell what people want to eat." "Only what they want to eat, nothing else? You can't read their minds in any other way?" "I don't think so," Izuku says. "You aren't hungry right now, so I can't tell what you want." "That's true. I just had a meal," he says with a smile. "What would you say if I told you I have a quirk similar to yours?" the man asked, leaning forward as if he was sharing a big secret. Izuku's eyes widened in surprise. "You do?" "I do. I collect quirks, too. Just in a different way. That's why I wanted to meet you. There aren't very many people like us in the world." "Wow. How many quirks do you got?" Izuku wanted to know. "Oh, a few more than 5, he answered with obvious amusement. The man asked a few more questions about when Izuku first got his quirks, and how he felt at the time it happened. The man nodded and smiled the entire time, and let Izuku talk as much as he wanted about his quirks. "I'm glad I came to talk to you today, Izuku. I hope I get to come and talk to you again soon." "Okay," Izuku said amiably. The man bent to shake Izuku's hand, and Izuku felt a strange shiver up his spine when their hands touched, but it was gone right away. "Bye-bye," Izuku told the man as he left. "Until next time," the man said. "Did you have a nice chat with the counselor?" the head teacher asked as Izuku joined the class on the carpet for their social skills time. "Aha," Izuku said. "He was nice." 5 minutes later, everyone who had seen the counselor forgot everything about him, or that he had been there at all. There was no note in Izuku's daily take-home journal, and no mention of him again at all. That day, when Tanaka-san came to pick him up at school, Izuku discovered he had a 6th quirk. He now had extraordinary balance and agility. As they walked, Izuku was full of chatter about the really super tall block tower he and 2 other kids had built during playtime. Tanaka-san grinned at him and listened, making appropriately impressed sounds as Izuku described it as being almost to the ceiling. They were stopping at the market on the way back to the Midoriya apartment to pick up ingredients for the meals that Tanaka-san was going to make for dinner and tomorrow's breakfast. Tanaka retrieved a shopping cart, and Izuku asked if he could ride inside. He was a little too big for the child's seat, but he liked to sit in the basket and be pushed around the store. Tanaka lifted him up, and Izuku's legs got caught on the edge of the cart's basket. The cart began to roll away under him, and Tanaka lost his grip on Izuku, and there was a tense moment when they both shouted in alarm as Izuku fell. Then everyone who looked their way froze in surprise. Izuku had caught himself on one hand and was doing a very awkward-looking handstand instead of crashing to the floor. His school bag was dangling and should have thrown him off a little, but Izuku seemed to have no trouble maintaining a steady balance. "Izuku, how are you doing that?" Tanaka asked, walking around him and looking at him from every angle. He pulled out his phone and snapped a picture. "I didn't want to hit my head," Izuku said reasonably. "It just happened. Can you stand up now, or do you need help?" Izuku put one of his legs down on the floor, and the rest of his body naturally followed gracefully until he had righted himself. "That was wild," Tanaka-san told him. "It scared the heck out of me, but it was really cool. You're not hurt." "Nope," Izuku said with a smile. They did their shopping, then went back to the apartment. Tanaka gave Izuku a snack while he put the groceries away. Then, instead of starting food preparation or laundry, he turned to Izuku and said, "Let's go to the park for a little bit." Izuku put on his new all-might shirt and light-up shoes, and went happily with Tanaka to the small park near the train station down the street. It was just a small grassy area where people could walk their dogs, but there was a swing set and a slide, too. "I want to try something out," Tanaka said, pulling out his phone and using it to pull up a video on it. He showed the short video to Izuku of a man doing a two-handed handstand on a gymnast mat. "Do you think you can copy that?" "I can try," Izuku decided after watching. It seemed pretty simple, and it was. He planted his hands in the grass and lifted his legs easily over his head with a grin, looking at Tanaka upside down. Tanaka laughed and took his picture. "Can you do it with one hand, like at the market?" Izuku could. He lifted one hand off the ground, pleased with Tanaka's excitement. "Okay, your face is turning all red," Tanaka said. "Better come down." Izuku easily stood back up and felt momentarily dizzy as the blood rushed from his head to the rest of his body. "Could you do any of that before?" Tanaka asked, sitting in the grass next to his charge. "I never tried," Izuku said, "but it's fun." "Let's see what else you can do," Tanaka suggested. Izuku watched a few more videos on Tanaka's phone, copying everything he was shown with ease. "Those are really advanced yoga poses," Tanaka said, snapping pictures the whole time. "I think maybe you picked up another quirk, kiddo." Izuku's heart sank a little. "What's the matter, Zu?" Tanaka asked, seeing Izuku's expression change from joy to concern in just a moment. "If I got a new quirk, it means someone died," he said gravely. "I guess so," Tanaka said, sobering as well. "But that's not your fault, okay?" The older boy looked around as if to make sure no one was around to hear them talking. "Let's go back for now," he said quietly, taking Izuku's hand. "I've still got a lot of chores to do." Since they were near the station, Tanaka stopped and gave Izuku a 100 yen coin to buy a sheet of stickers from a machine in front of a newspaper stand. Izuku wasn't lucky enough to get All Might, but he did get a sheet of Crimson Riot decals that he could put in his notebook, where he had been drawing various heroes he saw on TV. It was enough to distract him from his gloom. When they got home, Izuku went to get his notebook, and then Tanaka turned on the TV to a documentary about UA High School, where kids went to learn how to be heroes. Izuku was enthralled. He spent the rest of the day designing his own super suit, which greatly resembled his childish drawings of All Might. Tanaka joined him in playing with action figures once the chores were done, and played the victim of villains, so Izuku could save him from their evil clutches. When Hisashi came home later that evening, Izuku was grinning at him from where he was balanced on one hand on the back of the couch in his pajamas, and Tanaka was sleeping at the end of the same couch, a red, child-sized cape tied around his shoulders. "Looks like you wore him out, Zu," his dad told him with a chuckle. "I heard you had a busy day." Izuku giggled as his dad plucked him from the couch and carried him upside down into the living room and plopped him right side up into an armchair. "Tanaka says I have a new quirk." The laughter woke Tanaka, who sat up with a start and immediately apologized for falling asleep. "It's fine," Izuku heard his dad say. I was running late anyway, and you're still working a part-time job in the mornings, too. Izuku didn't know this about Tanaka and looked at him curiously. I only have a few more weeks to save up before I leave for university, Tanaka said sheepishly. You're leaving? Izuku asked in surprise. Not right away, Tanaka promised, but I get to go to university in the United States. I got a scholarship and everything. The United States? All Might went there, Izuku said knowledgeably. What's a soccer ship? A scholarship, his dad corrected. It's when someone pays for part of your school fees to make it easier for you to go. Oh. He didn't really understand a lot of the explanation, but he knew that Tanaka had to go away to school soon. I'm going to miss you, Izuku said sadly. I'm going to miss you too. We'll have to have a lot of fun memories before I go, Tanaka promised. Izuku thought that he would be taken straight to Dr. Tsubasa after he got his newest quirk, but he assured his dad that unless it seemed to be causing a problem, there was really nothing to be done. A week later, Izuku got to talk with a nice counselor who had a quirk like his. He was friendly and asked him questions about how he felt about his newest quirk. Did his body feel healthy? Did he get tired easily? Headaches? Nosebleeds? Did his arms or legs hurt? Izuku told him all about all of the cool things he could do now. He told him all about how he felt fine and liked to play superheroes with his babysitter, and how sad he was that Tanaka-san was going to have to go away to the United States soon. Who will look after you once Tanaka-san leaves? The nice man asked, sounding concerned. I don't know. My dad's assistant picks some people for my dad to choose from. Then he asks me. Izuku says, remembering what happened when Tanaka came. Very interesting, the man told him, patting him on the shoulder. I'm sure they'll find just the right person to look after you when it's time. I guess, Izuku said with a shrug, a little shiver skating up his spine. He still wasn't comfortable with the idea of losing Tanaka. 15 minutes later, Izuku was out on the playground, with no memory of the nice man who had been there only a short time ago. In fact, no one at the school remembered him at all. When Tanaka picked him up at school that day, he took Izuku to a bookshop, where he was picking up a book about the United States. He sat with Izuku in the kids' area and read to him for a while, then took him home by way of the shops in front of the station, where they stopped and got a couple of amiibo for a snack. Kitties! Izuku cried, pointing at a couple of shop cats lying in a patch of sun in front of a koban. Tanaka altered his steps so that Izuku could go and see if they were friendly. Be careful, Tanaka said as Izuku crouched next to a sleek white and black cat with large green eyes. They can scratch or bite if they don't like you. Izuku talked softly to the cats about how pretty they were for a minute, then carefully reached out his hand so they could sniff it. They didn't seem to have any objection to his presence, and the black and white one bumped Izuku's hand with its nose. I think it likes you, Tanaka said, nodding to Izuku. I think you can pet it, but don't touch its tummy. Most cats hate that. Izuku reached out a tentative hand and stroked the cat's head. Tanaka had his phone out, ready to take a picture. He had been taking a lot of them lately, saying he wanted lots of photos for when he went away. It's really soft, Izuku said. He stroked it a couple of more times before Tanaka noticed something was off. I don't think, oh boy. Izuku pulled his hand away, and Tanaka let out a sound somewhere between a snort and a wheeze. The cat looked different now, and Izuku sat back on his heels while Tanaka laughed almost hysterically, but silently. Izuku wasn't really sure why, but the laughter was contagious and soon he was laughing too. The cat blinked at them, but was otherwise indifferent to the patch of fur on its head that had grown about 5 or 6 centimeters in the past few moments. Tanaka finally calmed down and wiped a tear from his very red cheek before he crouched down beside Izuku and put a hand on his back. Give it another pet and see what happens. See if it'll let you scratch under its chin. Cats love that. Izuku nodded and stroked the cat's head a couple more times, then moved his hand under its chin and tickled. The cat approved of this and began to purr, tilting its head this way and that to coax Izuku to reach the spots it wanted. Tanaka was trying to hold his laughter back while he held his phone steady, taking a video as the cat grew a white beard to match the flowing black locks now sweeping from the top of its head. Okay, Izuku, that's enough, Tanaka finally said. pocketing his phone. We'd better get you home. Better not touch anything on the way. Okay? Izuku wasn't sure what was going on, but the cat did look pretty silly now. He grinned and followed along as Tanaka led the way home. When they got there, Tanaka had Izuku wash his hands since he'd touched an unfamiliar animal, then bravely asked Izuku to pat the top of his head. Izuku did so, stroking the spiky black hair as he had the cat's fur, but nothing happened. Izuku tried his own head at Tanaka's urging, but it stayed the same too. Maybe it only works on cats, Tanaka mused as he gave Izuku the umebo and some fruit milk before getting started on the chores. Heard you got another quirk, Izuku's dad said the next morning. Izuku had fallen asleep before his father had gotten home, and hadn't gotten a chance to see him before now. I guess, he said with a shrug, I made a cat grow a beard. Yes, I saw, his dad said with some amusement. Tanaka-kun sent me a video and pictures. It didn't hurt the cat, Izuku assured him. It liked being petted. We might have to do a little testing with this quirk, kiddo. We need to know what kinds of animals you can and can't be touching without permission, his dad told him, not sounding too upset. But I'm more concerned that you've had 2 new quirks show up when you haven't been anywhere but school. I'm gonna have to check the area and see if there's a nursing or care home around there that I don't know about. You may have to go somewhere else. I like my school, Izuku said with a pout. Mei-chan and Takashi-kun are my friends. I know, Zu, but it's more important that you be safe. I won't make a decision right now, but I won't make any promises either. Izuku pouted about this, but there wasn't much he could do about it, otherwise. Izuku could hear his dad talking to Dr. Tsubasa on the phone later that day, answering questions about Izuku's new quirk, confirming that Izuku's health seemed totally fine. Izuku was relieved that he didn't have to go to another appointment when the call was over. Instead, his dad took him to a shopping mall in the city. The store they went to had all kinds of animals in tanks, cages, and pens, all for sale. People milled around in front the windows, cooing over kittens and puppies and other animals. Izuku held his dad's hand and was careful not to touch anything as they approached the counter. Hello, I'm Midoriya Hisashi, his dad told the person at the counter. I called earlier and spoke to the manager? A few minutes later, Izuku was kneeling on the floor of a tiny room that was meant for people to use to meet animals they might like to buy. The manager of the store brought in 3 cages and set them on the floor in front of Izuku. You're sure this won't hurt the animals? The man asked, looking at Izuku's dad. He's only done it once, but the cat involved seemed to enjoy it, his dad answered. I'll take full responsibility. The man nodded and opened one of the cages and removed a small white mouse. He held it carefully in his hand and extended it toward the waiting boy. You'd better let me hold it. Mice can be squirmy, the shopkeeper advised. Just use a finger on the top of his head to pet him. Izuku smiled at the way the mouse's whiskers twitched and gently tickled the top of its head with his index finger. When he pulled his finger away, the mouse sported a tuft of hair that made it look like it was wearing a hat made of dandelion fluff. That's adorable, the manager said with a chuckle. All done with this one? At Izuku's nod, the man put the mouse back and opened the next cage, which held a guinea pig. The little rodent made a repetitive squealing noise that concerned Izuku, but the manager assured him that guinea pigs were just noisy like that, and it wasn't in pain. He let Izuku hold it in his lap, and Izuku giggled and it tried to shove its way under his shirt. He stroked its wavy fur while he laughed at the tickle of little paws crawling on him. When the manager picked the animal up from his lap, they could all see that the guinea pig looked like it was ready to model for a pet shampoo ad. Its fur had been about 3 centimeters long before, but now hung in thick waves to cascade a few centimeters over the man's hands as he put it back in its cage. This is one of the best things I've ever seen, the man said, sounding sincere. Let's try something that isn't a mammal. The third cage held a small blue and green parakeet. It hopped onto the man's outstretched finger, and he moved it over in front of Izuku. Try petting it on its back between its wings, he suggested. Izuku looked to his dad, who nodded that it was okay. Izuku carefully did as instructed, but the only thing that happened was that the bird nibbled at his arm. No feathers grew or fell out or anything else. Interesting, the manager said. Let me take these back out, and I'll be back with some more. An hour later, Izuku left the store knowing that his new quirk only worked on mammals, as far as they could tell, though not humans. The chances of him ever getting near enough to touch a monkey or a bear or tiger or anything of that nature was very small, so they might never know if this quirk worked on them. Izuku also learned that his father was not keen on him having a snake or a tarantula for a pet anytime soon. Izuku was happy to spend some time with his father, who had the day off for a change. After the pet store, they strolled around the mall, and Izuku was allowed to have a bubble milk tea as they walked. It was a good day. Chapter 5. Summary. Izuku gets a new babysitter, meets a man with a quirk kind of like his, and meets Kaken again. 2 weeks before Tanaka was due to leave for the United States, Izuku's dad brought home a young woman to meet him. She was a university student, he said, that was studying to become a teacher. Izuku thought she was pretty, and that she had a nice smile, but there was something about her he wasn't quite sure of. He hid behind his father's legs when they were introduced, and didn't want to talk to her. Izuku's dad, to his credit, did not try to force the encounter. He apologized to the young woman, but explained that he needed someone in the position that Izuku felt extremely comfortable with, and that he was sorry he had wasted her time. The young woman had stared at Izuku for a few moments longer than seemed polite before she simply turned around and left without another word. 2 other candidates were also rejected by Izuku, and his dad finally asked him if he was just turning them down because he didn't want Tanaka to leave. I don't want him to leave, but I know he's gonna, Izuku said solemnly. But those other people felt bad. I didn't like them. They looked nice, but they weren't. His dad had lifted an eyebrow at him, but simply ruffled his hair and said, okay. The week before Tanaka had to leave, Izuku's dad brought home one more candidate. She was different from the others, and Izuku liked her at once. She was short and plump, with gray strands in very dark purple hair cut short to frame her face. Everything about her seemed to be what Izuku imagined a grandmother would be like. He came out from behind his father's legs and offered her a shy smile. Pleased to meet you, he said politely. I'm Midoriya Izuku. She smiled at him with slightly crooked teeth, and her eyes crinkled in the corners. He liked her immediately. Do you like All Might? He asked her, giving her the ultimate test of suitability. Oh my, yes, she said. He's so big and handsome. She gave him a wink and Izuku's dad chuckled. I like her, Izuku decided, looking up at his dad. That was how Granny Ito came to be in charge of taking care of Izuku and Hisashi when Tanaka left to continue his education abroad. Izuku missed Tanaka, but Granny Ito was really nice to have around. She picked him up from school each day. Dad's search for care homes nearby had turned up nothing, and walked with him, listening intently to his chatter. She baked special treats, her meals were really yummy, and she had a quirk that let her grow really nice houseplants. She read to him a lot and helped him learn how to. As far as he was concerned, she could stay forever. A week after Granny Ito began working for the Midoriyas, she told Izuku that they were going to go on a field trip. She picked him up from school and they took a train. He kneeled on the bench seat and watched as the scenery flew by, and he kept up a stream of chatter about everything he saw. He recognized 1 or 2 hero agencies by their signs and exclaimed excitedly. She smiled at him, but seemed nervous and uncomfortable. What's wrong, Granny Ito? If you don't want to take me anywhere, you don't have to, Izuku told her, noticing she was twisting her hands in her lap. No, she said with a strained smile. Don't worry, Izuku. Everything is going to be fine. We're going to see something you'll really like. Izuku tried to coax their destination out of her, making guesses like the zoo or a candy store, but she simply smiled. You'll see. They got off the train about 40 minutes after they got on, and walked through an area with some tall buildings. When they got to where Granny Ito wanted to go, Izuku looked at the building with a sense of disappointment. The building was utterly plain, with no real distinguishing features. She rang a doorbell, and there was a buzzer before the door clicked, and she pulled it open, ushering a hesitant Izuku into the dim interior. Who's that? A voice demanded. Izuku looked over to where the voice had come from, a scrawny boy with white, messy hair, torn jeans, and a wrinkly t-shirt. He didn't look very old, maybe just shy of going to middle school, but was pale and sickly looking. He also didn't look happy to see them. "Tamura," a man's voice said from the doorway that the boy was standing in. "You haven't finished the assignment I gave you." "Yes, sensei," the boy said in a surly tone. He glared at Granny Ito and Izuku for a moment longer before turning on his heel and slouching out of sight. A moment later, a tall man appeared who looked vaguely familiar to Izuku, but he couldn't think why. "Please forgive my student," the man said cordially. "He doesn't deal well with strangers." Izuku wasn't sure what was going on, and held Granny Ito's hand in his own, even though he was getting to be a little old for such things. "Ito-san, thank you for bringing Midoriya-kun to visit me. You can go and wait in the lounge if you would. Our little meeting shouldn't take too long, and then the two of you can be on your way." Granny Ito gently released Izuku's hand and shooed him toward the man. "Go on, dear. Everything will be just fine." Izuku's reluctance melted away at her words, and he walked over to where the man was waiting. "Follow me. There's someone I want you to meet with," the man told him, leading him down a hallway. Izuku glanced into the room that the boy had been in and saw he was bent over a large desk, writing something. The other boy must have sensed that he was being watched, because he looked up from his work and stared at Izuku until Izuku moved past, following the man. "Who are you?" Izuku finally asked the man, as he opened a door and led him into a room that looked like a doctor's office exam room. "My name is Shigaraki," he answered, patting the exam table for Izuku to climb onto. "I brought you here so Dr. Tsubasa can run a few tests on you. You remember him, don't you?" "Uh-huh," Izuku said, kicking his legs as they dangled off the edge of the table. "Why didn't we go see him at the hospital like last time?" "It's dangerous for you to go to a hospital because of your quirk, isn't it?" Shigaraki-san said. That made sense. Dr. Tsubasa came into the room just a moment later, wearing a lab coat and carrying a small metal tray, a tray that Izuku recognized. "You're going to poke me with a needle," Izuku said accusingly. "You won't even feel it," Shigaraki-san told him. "I'll hold your hand the whole time." Izuku put his hand into Shigaraki's, and then the next thing he knew, he blinked and it was over. He wasn't sitting anymore, but laying on the exam table, and sat up in confusion. "All done. Let's get you back to Ito-san," Shigaraki said, lifting him off the table and setting him on his feet. "Did he poke me with a needle?" "Yes, he needed a little more of your blood to run some tests and do some research. Your quirk is very, very interesting to me and to him. Your blood might be able to help us figure out what makes you so special." He led Izuku back to the front door area. The boy he called Tamura earlier was no longer in the room off the hall. Granny Ito heard them coming and stood to meet them. She was twisting her fingers and looked anxious. "How are you? Are you okay, Izuku?" she asks worriedly, looking the boy over with a critical eye. Izuku nodded easily and took her hand. "You said it wouldn't take very long," she said to Shigaraki-san. "It's been an hour." "We needed to be thorough," he said. "He won't remember any of this in 5 minutes' time, so be sure to take him away and spend some time somewhere interesting before taking him home. We wouldn't want to have the missing time damage his psyche, would we?" Izuku had no idea what they were talking about. "Still," she said with a sniff, "the trust quirk I gave you will smooth things over. They will suspect nothing. Keep doing as I say, and your family and their restaurant will be fine." "I thought your quirk was a green thumb," Izuku said, commenting on the only thing he even sort of followed. "It is," she told him, tugging him toward the door. "The one I was born with, anyway." She guided him out into the afternoon sunshine and helped him fasten the zipper on his jacket. They walked down the street to a busier road and turned toward a different station than the one they had arrived at. "Now that we've got that out of the way, I can show you what we came all the way out here to see," Granny Ito told him. Izuku was puzzled for a moment about what he meant by "got that out of the way," but decided she must mean the long train ride to get here. He didn't question how they had gotten so far from the station, or why they were headed back in that direction. Granny Ito was nice and always took really good care of him. As they neared the station, Granny Ito pointed upward, and Izuku looked to see what she was showing him. There, right in front of a big store, was a humongous All Might statue. The fiberglass figure was almost as tall as the roof of the building it was standing in front of. Izuku gasped and tugged at Granny's hand, trying to get her to walk faster so that he could see it up close. There were people everywhere taking pictures in front of the giant All Might, and Izuku was in awe of how the hero seemed to be smiling at the whole town from up there. "This is so cool," Izuku said enthusiastically. "That's not all," Granny told him with a smile, enjoying his reaction. She turned him gently by the shoulders to see the store behind the statue was full of hero merchandise. Izuku's eyes turned to saucers as he stared. "Can we go in? Can we?" "Of course we can," she laughed. "I told your father I was bringing you to see this, and he gave me some money so you could pick out something small as a souvenir." Izuku was practically vibrating with joy about this, but waited patiently and held Granny's hand when she told him to. The store had only recently opened and was quite crowded with people of all ages. All Might was the main hero on display, but there were also items for Endeavor, Crimson Riot, No Nonsense, and all the other top-tier heroes. Izuku was in heaven. He took his time looking at everything in his price range, and finally settled on a poster for his bedroom wall. While they paid for it, he was also allowed to enter a drawing for a limited edition All Might snow globe that would be coming out in 3 months' time for the Christmas season. Granny Ito bought him a package of All Might-shaped cheese crackers to eat before they got back on the train and headed back home. As far as Izuku was concerned, it had been a great day. Granny Ito took Izuku on field trips to that statue about once a month after that. He had quite a growing collection of All Might posters and trading cards. By the time Izuku started first grade, it seemed like Granny Ito had always been with them. She never missed a day of picking him up from the kindergarten and always made yummy meals and took him on little adventures a lot. First grade was more formal than his old school, and Izuku had a longer school day once he started attending. On his first day, he chafed a bit at his new uniform, missing the loose-fitting shirt and shorts from his old school when he was forced to wear navy shorts and a button-up shirt and a navy vest. His shoes were shiny new black leather, stiff and hard to walk in compared to his sneakers. He was glad when he got to change into his indoor shoes. His dad walked him to the classroom for the first time and greeted the teacher. They had met her before because of the nature of Izuku's quirk and the subsequent quirks as a result. She seemed a little uneasy about it, but was friendly enough. Izuku liked the look of his new classroom. Each student had a desk with a little hook on the side for their school bags, and there was a bright carpet in the corner with different colored polka dots all over it in the back of the room. There were brightly colored decorations hanging on the walls along with hiragana and katakana charts, the English alphabet and number charts. Izuku was proud that he could already count to 50, though sometimes he forgot 37 and 38. There were other children finding their seats or saying goodbye to their parents, when Izuku spotted 3 familiar faces. "Dad, it's Auntie and Uncle and Kakin," Izuku said excitedly, tugging on his dad's sleeve. "So it is." His dad smiled down at him. The teacher moved on to speak with other parents and students, and Izuku went over to greet the Bakugos family. "Izuku-kun," Auntie said with a huge smile. She crouched down to ruffle his hair and exclaim over how much he'd grown since she last saw him. Uncle shook hands with his dad, and Kakin just stared sullenly. "What's Deku doing here?" Kakin demanded of no one in particular. His mother flicked his ear and scowled at him. "Hi Kakin," Izuku said timidly, trying to be friendly. "TCH," was Kakin's reply. The teacher got everyone's attention at that point, and thanked them all for coming, then gently escorted the parents out the door so that they could begin their school day. Izuku found his desk and climbed into the seat, looking at that stack of supplies sitting on top, waiting for him. There was a yellow sun hat on the top of the pile, and under that, folders, a notebook, crayons and markers and pencils and paper. Izuku felt excited about all of the things he would be doing with each item and listened to the teacher and her aide with rapt attention. They spent their morning getting to know each other and singing songs and learning their way around the classroom. Soon, they sat on the colorful carpet with each boy or girl on one of the polka dots, facing the teacher, who sat in a chair and read them a story about a boy that fell into a koi pond and had an adventure with the fish. "How many of you think you could hold your breath that long?" the teacher asked the class. Hands shot into the air in excitement. "Let's see who can hold their breath the longest. Ready? Go!" 20 sets of chubby cheeks puffed out as everyone sucked in a breath and held it. Izuku won the game, because as soon as he held his breath, he turned transparent and all the other kids gasped and giggled and pointed. Izuku started to laugh with them, but then Kaken decided to speak out. "That's a stupid quirk." Some kids gasped. One girl said he was mean. Several scolded him for saying a bad word. Izuku just sat there and looked at the navy blue stripes on his white socks, feeling sad that Kaken was still mad at him since the last time they had seen each other. One of the girls that Izuku thought was called Emery patted his arm in sympathy and whispered, "He's dumb. Your quirk is cool." Izuku smiled shyly at her and felt better. At lunchtime, they all learned how to push their desks together to turn them into tables. Kaken was at the end of Izuku's table, and Izuku was filled with dread about what he might say to the other children about him. Izuku's dad had told him not to advertise the fact that he had multiple quirks, though he didn't have to keep it a strict secret either. They already knew about the see-through one, so Izuku kept quiet about having more than that. Unfortunately, while they were eating their lunch, the talk turned to quirks. Emery-chan said that she could stretch her arms almost a meter to reach stuff up high. Izuku thought that a quirk like that would be really useful. Michikuin could turn his hands into flippers like a seal. Aiko could scream loud enough to break glass, and Goro could make his hair change color by shaking his head really fast. "I've got the best quirk of anyone," Kaken bragged. "The sweat on my hands can explode." He looked at the other kids at their table as if waiting for them to be impressed. But that didn't quite happen. "Ew," Emery-chan said, wrinkling her nose. "What are you talking about?" Kaken demanded angrily. "Explosions are cool. I'm going to be the greatest hero in the world when I grow up." "You'll never be as good as All Might," Michikuin told him airily. "Will too," Kaken said back heatedly. "I'm going to be a hero someday too," Izuku announced. "I dunno," Aiko-chan said skeptically. "Turning see-through isn't very good for heroes." "Like I said," Kaken said smugly, "it's a stupid quirk. All his quirks are lame." "All his quirks?" Emery-chan asked. "How many do you have, Aizu-chan?" Izuku opened his mouth to answer, but Kaken beat him to it. "He's got 4, 'cause he's a freak." All the kids around the room turned to stare, because Kaken's voice was so loud. "Nobody has 4 quirks," one of the kids from the next table said. "Deku does," Kaken insisted, "because he steals them from dead people." Izuku's eyes widened. He didn't know how Kaken knew about how he got his new quirks. "What?" several kids asked. The teachers tried to get the situation under control, but it was too late. Chatter swept across the classroom while kids all tried to ask Izuku about it at once. "Go ahead, Deku. Tell them," Kaken said with satisfaction. "Boys and girls," the teacher said, clapping her hands to get their attention. "That's enough. We'll talk more about this after lunch. Until then, focus on eating and being kind to each other." Izuku sighed and put down his chopsticks. He wasn't hungry anymore. "Do you really have 4 quirks?" Emery-chan asked him in a whisper voice. 7. Izuku told her miserably in an even quieter whisper. "That's so cool. You're so lucky," she whispered excitedly. Izuku looked at her in amazement and felt some of the pressure in his chest dissipate. After lunch, they all did their part to clean up and put the classroom back to the way it had been. When they were finished, the teacher stood in front of the class. "Normally, this would be when we would go outside for recess, but I think that we should have a talk as a class first." Everyone sat back on the polka dot carpet, and the teacher called Izuku up to stand in front of everyone. "Our friend Izuku-kun has a very special quirk," she told them. "It's a quirk that gives him other quirks. He steals them from dead people," Kaken said with a nod. "I do not," Izuku fired back hotly. "It's not stealing." The other kids were unusually silent during this exchange, waiting to see what would happen. "Izuku-kun," the teacher said kindly, putting a hand on his shoulder. "When you came to meet me the other day, you did a very good job of explaining how your quirk works. Why don't you tell them about it, the same way you told me?" Izuku felt nervous with all of those eyes on him, but swallowed and told them about how his dad had told him to think of it like collecting shells. Most of the kids looked confused, but accepting. Several hands shot into the air to ask questions. How many quirks do you got? A little boy whose name Izuku couldn't remember asked. 7, Izuku said uncertainly. Whoa! Many of the kids murmured in awe. Kaken looked as if someone had slapped him in the face. Cool. Lucky. What are they? Aiko-chan asked. The collecting one, I can turn see-through, I can tell what people want to eat, I can make some animals' hair grow, I can change plastic stuff a different color, and I got really good balance and agility, Izuku said, counting on his fingers. Oh, and I got my mom's quirk that lets me pull small things to me. Agility, the teacher corrected with a smile. There was the familiar TCH sound, and Izuku knew it was Kaken, though he didn't say anything more, at least not yet. When they were finally released to go outside and play, Izuku had a group of other kids around him, curious to know more about how his quirk worked and to tell him about their own. He was just as interested in their quirks as they were in his. He asked them lots of questions about theirs and wished he knew how to write better so he could put them in his notebook. Tanaka used to help him before. Maybe Granny Ito could help him this time. They were all trying to organize a game of tag. When Kaken made an appearance, the teacher had asked him to stay inside for a minute more for a talk, and started trying to cause trouble. You'd better watch out, or Deku will steal your quirk next, he told them with a leer. Who's Deku? One of them asked. It's that freak, he said, pointing to Izuku. It means useless. That's mean. You're mean, one of the other kids accused. I don't want my quirk stolen, said one of the girls, sounding scared. I can't just take quirks, Izuku said worriedly. And I wouldn't anyway. Yeah, you have to die first, Emery said with her hands on her hips. And you're a kid. You're not going to die for a long, long time. Many of the kids looked unsure about everything, but most were on Izuku's side. Come on, let's go play, a boy called Hashihiko said, breaking the awkwardness. Bet you can't run as fast as me. The rest of the day was better, and Izuku had made the beginnings of some friendships with classmates, even if Kaken wasn't among them. Granny Ito was waiting for him when he was released at the end of class, which was later than his old school let out. She listened to his account of his day and asked lots of questions as they went home. He tried to stay up to tell his dad all about it when he got home from work, but he was worn out from his long first day and fell asleep long before his father arrived. Chapter 6. Summary. Izuku enjoys some normalcy, or so he thinks, until he encounters a man with a quirk a little like his and things change. Chapter text. The school year was a relatively good one for Izuku. Kaken continued to try to rally the other kids against him, but was largely unsuccessful in his attempts. He quieted down a bit after the school called his parents about his bullying and brash behavior, but still insisted on calling Izuku Deku instead of his real name. Izuku didn't really mind, since the other kids were friendly and most of them agreed that Kaken was mean. Granny Ito took Izuku on field trips every so often, but Izuku always had fun and came back with some sort of reward for excellent behavior. During one such outing, Izuku acquired a mysterious, almost black, bruise in the crook of his arm, but he said it didn't hurt. Granny Ito told him and his father that it was probably a strange reaction to an insect bite. They trusted her, of course. Over the summer, Izuku enjoyed trips to the beach, field trips with Granny Ito to pick berries at a farm, or to the hero store, or even a couple of overnight trips to festivals. Granny's sister ran, and in that they stayed at that was a lot of fun. He met Dr. Tsubasa and Shigaraki-san several times over the summer, but never remembered it afterward. He got to visit colorful shrines and temples with beautiful landscapes, and even got to meet some local heroes of small towns they visited. The only thing that wasn't really welcome was Izuku attaining a new quirk called Teflon that made things not stick to him. His skin didn't feel any different to the touch, but it was kind of a pain because his socks would slide down really easily, and hats didn't like to stay on him unless they were tied under his chin. A little research helped them learn that Granny Ito's sister had an inn next to a house where an elderly woman lived, and she had died of old age there while Izuku was nearby. He had to make adjustments to his clothes like belts or suspenders, straps and buckles to secure anything to him. The good part was that he didn't really get dirty. Spills just seemed to roll right off of his skin. When school started again, The other kids thought his new quirk was hilarious and would purposely spatter paint or other things on him to see if they could make anything stick. In the end, they all got scolded because while Izuku's skin stayed clean, his clothing did not. I don't understand how you can have 7 quirks, and all of them end up being lame. Kaken had teased him one day when no one else was around. You really are a Deku. Izuku refused to get upset. He was sure that Kaken was just jealous. He felt bad that Kaken had such a wonderful quirk, but still got mad that Izuku had a handful of mediocre ones. Sorry, Kaken, he told his former friend. I don't get to choose, you know? For some reason, that only made Kaken angrier, and Izuku left him alone as much as possible. As the school year progressed and winter was in full swing, Kaken began to make almost everything into a competition, especially with Izuku. In PE, he bragged about being the fastest runner and the highest or farthest jumper. He was good at sports, but some of the other kids were better at some things. Izuku was never quite able to beat him most of the time, but didn't lag behind by much, either. That didn't stop Kaken from calling him Deku and lame and other mean things. Some of the kids that hung out with Kaken did the same, but Izuku didn't care about them. On the day that Izuku scored a goal in soccer while Kaken was playing goalie, they got into an actual physical fight. Kaken got so mad that Izuku bested him, that he used his quirk on the ball. It rocketed toward Izuku, hitting him in the face with a loud thonk. Izuku had been stunned as his lip split and started to swell and his nose began to bleed. Kaken had laughed at that, until Izuku threw the ball back at him and hit him in the chest with it. Izuku didn't have a quirk that let him launch the ball like the other boy had, so it didn't hit him very hard. Kaken had gotten angry that Izuku had dared retaliate, even if it didn't hurt, that he used his quirk on Izuku's shoulder, burning his pea shirt. By the time the teacher pried them apart, both boys were hitting each other and shouting. Granny Ito was the one who came to talk to the teachers when they called home about it. Izuku sat in a chair beside her, looking at his shoes with tears in his eyes. Kaken sat next to his father with a scowl on his face and traces of blood under his nose and a long row of scratches down one arm. Izuku had promptly apologized when he was told to, and he even meant it. He didn't want to fight, he never had. All he had ever wanted was acceptance from a friend he admired. Kaken, on the other hand, refused to apologize and made it known that he definitely wasn't sorry. No matter how his father tried to reason with him, Kaken would only say that he hoped Deku would drop dead. Granny Ito held onto Izuku's hand firmly and finally spoke up. I will speak to Izuku about his behavior today, she said soothingly. I'm sorry for the inconvenience and trouble this has caused. I hope that Katsuki-kun will think about what he's done and realize that hurting people is never the answer to frustration. The principal allowed Granny Ito to take Izuku home and said Izuku would be allowed to come back the following day, since he had apologized, and reports from other students said he had not instigated the attack. Since Kaken was not repentant, he would be suspended for the rest of the school week. It was made very clear that Katsuki-kun was a problematic presence at the school and was often reprimanded for behavior that could only be described as bullying. Izuku went home with Granny Ito, expecting to be confined to his room or punished in some way. Instead, Granny sat him at the table and gave him a slice of cake and a cup of milk. She sat down across from him while he ate and sighed. To be honest, Izuku, I thought that something like this might happen. Your father expected it to happen a lot sooner. Izuku stared. Katsuki is a very angry little boy, she said gently. He's been spoiled, and it's turned him into a bit of brat. What he did today was wrong. I shouldn't have hit him with the ball, Izuku said, putting down his fork. No, you shouldn't have. I understand why you did, though. Sometimes things happen that make us angry, and we end up doing something we shouldn't. Understanding that what we did wasn't okay and apologizing for it is important, but staying in control is better. I am sorry, Izuku said sadly. I just got really mad because he laughed when I got hurt, then kept hitting me, and he used his quirk, even though we're not supposed to. I know, she said with a soft smile, but next time, I want you to try to remember that you're not like Katsuki-kun. You need to be better than him and just walk away when he acts angry like that. Tell a teacher if he tries to hurt you or says he's going to hurt you. Okay. Izuku nodded. All right, She nodded, standing up. That's all I'll say about it, then. Finish your cake, and we'll get started on the chores. Kaken didn't come back to school. Izuku's dad told him that he'd gotten a call from the Bakugos and that they had decided that it would be easier for both Katsuki and Izuku if they went to separate schools, at least for a while. Since Izuku hadn't been the one causing trouble, it was only fair that he be allowed to stay at his current school and enjoy his new friends and teachers. Izuku felt tears prick his eyes at the news and was ashamed to find that they were ones of relief instead of grief. He had honestly wanted to be Kaken's friend and had been pushed away so many times. Seeing him again in first grade had seemed like a chance to start over, but that was impossible now. Izuku flourished once Kaken was gone. The teachers simply told the other kids that Bakugokuen had transferred to a private school, and everyone had accepted it. Izuku excelled in reading, writing, and history, but struggled with English. Math was okay, but he wasn't brilliant at it either. School was school, he liked it but didn't love it. He had a group of kids he liked and played with, but didn't allow himself to really have a best friend, or go to anyone's houses when he was invited. He had learned his lesson about that from Kaken. First grade ended and Granny Ito waved goodbye to them as they started the summer break. Izuku's dad took him to Sapporo with him on a combination business trip and vacation. His dad's company was having something called an executive retreat, and Izuku was allowed to go along and join a summer camp that featured a lot of time hiking and learning about nature. His favorite part was the huge sunflower fields and getting to play in the streams, even though they were freezing cold. He met a lot of interesting kids from a couple of different countries and got to practice his English a little. From there, Izuku and his dad went to Okinawa for a couple of days. His dad had a lot of business meetings, but Izuku was still able to go to the beach and earn a few more freckles on his cheeks and nose as souvenirs. After that, they had to go to Taiwan again. That wasn't as fun for Izuku, but it was better than the time before. The grief of losing his mother wasn't as fresh as before, and they were staying in a fancy hotel that even had a pool. The person that his dad found to look after him while he worked spoke Japanese, and was polite and somewhat disinterested in babysitting, but not unkind. Izuku played in the pool, watched movies in the room, and learned origami from the computer while his guardian tapped away at a laptop most of the time. His dad even took some time to take him to some sightseeing spots around the city before they traveled back to Japan. He'd been away from home for almost a month. Granny Ito showed up the day they returned, and Izuku threw his arms around her middle and hugged her. She seemed surprised by the sudden affection, but pleased at the same time. She explained that she had taken time away from her family's business for the next 2 weeks, to look after Izuku full-time until school began again. "You have another job?" Izuku asked in surprise. "Not officially," she said as she tackled the laundry from their trip. "I help my family with their restaurant before I come to get you each day." Izuku had had no idea that Granny Ito did anything other than look after him. "It used to be mine before my husband passed away, and my daughter and her husband run the place now." "Where is it? What kind of food do they have?" Izuku wanted to know, suddenly full of questions. "Can I visit? No wonder you're such a good cook." Granny Ito had smiled a little sadly, but nodded. "It's not too far away, just a 20-minute train ride. Maybe we can go for lunch one day before school starts again." "If you already have a job and stuff, why do you work here?" Izuku wanted to know. "Some things happened," she said gently, "and I like working here. My children are grown up, so getting to see you every day keeps me young. Now, what did you bring me from your trip?" The distraction was enough to send Izuku running to find his backpack, which was filled with souvenirs. 2 days later, Granny Ito took Izuku on a field trip, where he met a nice man with a very similar quirk to his, but he couldn't really remember anything about it. He got to visit the restaurant run by Granny's daughter, and got to eat some delicious katsudon while he was there. Granny's daughter seemed a little afraid of Izuku, which Izuku thought was silly, but he minded his manners and tried not to fidget so much. As time went on, Izuku started second grade and was glad to see his friends again. At home, he became more and more proficient in the kitchen under Granny's watchful eye. He learned how to make a passable tamagoyaki, decent miso soup, rice, and by extension rice balls and even curry with a little help. He also liked to help with the chores and learned how to properly scrub the bathtub, vacuum the floors, and wash dishes. He didn't have quite the eye for detail that Granny did or even Tanaka, but he did all right. Things settled into an easy rhythm with few hiccups. Izuku avoided getting any new quirks for the entirety of second grade, in fact. It wasn't until just before Christmas during his third grade year that he went on a field trip with Granny Ito that his quirk situation changed. Izuku had been pulled out of school a little early one Friday to go to a dental appointment. And after that, Granny had taken him to meet a nice man with a quirk very similar to Izuku's own. He also met a boy in his very early teens with white hair and a scarred face, and a man with black mist where his head should be. The boy's name was Tamura, and to 8-year-old Izuku he seemed practically grown up. They'd asked him a bunch of odd questions, and then before he left, Dr. Tsubasa, whom he hadn't seen in years, arrived and drew some of this blood. They said he had his dad's permission, and Granny Ito nodded when asked to confirm. So Izuku didn't put up a fuss. The whole thing had been very odd. The man with the quirk like Izuku's rode the train with Granny and Izuku back to Tokyo, since he had business there. He spoke to Izuku about the heroes that Izuku liked best, and Izuku went on at length about the subject. When they arrived in Tokyo, Shigaraki, that was the man's name, asked if they might accompany him to meet someone for a few minutes before they separated. Izuku and Granny Ito followed him to a normal apartment complex. It didn't look that much different from the one that Izuku lived in, just in a different part of the city. They went to an apartment on the 5th floor, and when the door was answered, there was a nurse there to greet them. She's stable, but she doesn't have long. Another couple of days at most, the nurse told Shigaraki, before moving to disappear into another room. Shigaraki ushered them into a room where a hospital bed was set up, and a woman about the age he remembered his own mother being when she died was sitting up, with her face turned toward the window. She was painfully thin, and her skin was grayish and waxy looking. There were straps secured across her legs and hips, over the blanket. There were no flowers or room decor, just bare walls and floor and plain white blinds hanging above the windows. It smelled stale and a bit dusty in the room. "I'm not supposed to be near sick people," Izuku said, his steps faltering. "It's all right," Shigaraki told him. "I already spoke to your father, and he said it was perfectly fine. There's no danger here." Granny Ito took Izuku's hand, something she hadn't done in a long time, now that he was getting older. Izuku gripped hers, feeling uneasy. "This is Mariko," Shigaraki said. "She was one of Dr. Tsubasa's experimental patients." Izuku didn't know what that meant, but Granny squeezed his hand even tighter as they looked at the woman. Mariko didn't move or acknowledge their presence. She seemed like a living doll except for being so sickly. She simply wasn't a suitable candidate for our project, and her body rejected the treatments. "We weren't going to keep her, but I thought she might be suitable for one more test," Shigaraki explained as if Izuku was supposed to know what he was talking about. Shigaraki was studying Izuku intently, as if expecting something, but Izuku didn't know what. However, within moments, Mariko closed her eyes and seemed to relax back into the pillow under her head, and there was a long, tinny-sounding whine coming from a small machine on the table beside the bed. Izuku felt a shiver crawl up his spine, and his skin erupted in goosebumps. The nurse who had answered the door came into the room and shut off the machine. Then she looked at Shigaraki, who smiled and nodded. The woman turned and left the room again. "Looks like Mariko isn't up for company right now," Shigaraki said. "But I think the test had very interesting results." "What was the test?" Izuku asked quietly, not wanting to wake the woman in the bed. Shigaraki motioned for them to leave the room, and he shut the door as all three of them filed out into the living room. This room was devoid of furniture or decor altogether. "The test was for you, Izuku. The rest isn't important, but I will say that I'm quite pleased." Izuku was beyond confused, and Granny Ito looked upset. "Am I understanding what just happened?" "The nurse said 1 or 2 days, not minutes," Granny asked Shigaraki. "Correct," Shigaraki affirmed. "Not only does he inherit quirks left behind, he can hasten the host's passing, if they are close enough to the end." Izuku hoped he was wrong about what Shigaraki-san was saying. It seemed like Granny and Shigaraki were using a roundabout way of talking so that Izuku wouldn't really know what they were saying. But he wasn't stupid. Did that lady in there just die?" he croaked, pointing at the bedroom door. "Yes," Shigaraki said, sounding unconcerned. She died quite quickly and peacefully, didn't she? Izuku could feel his heart starting to race, and his breath was coming short as his stomach twisted in his gut. Granny Ito was rubbing circles on his back and telling him to take deep breaths. Is it my fault? Izuku demanded, on the verge of tears. No, Granny told him forcefully. Not even a little. She was very sick, and there was nothing that could be done for her. Izuku felt her words soothe him. Granny was the most trustworthy person he knew. She wouldn't lie to him. It was sad that the lady had died, though. Don't worry, Izuku, Shigaraki told him, sounding pleased. This is something I have suspected for a while now. You've given me much to consider, and so I've given you something, too. A new quirk from the recently departed. I want to see how your body handles something a little more powerful. It's one I think you'll eventually enjoy. You'll have to discover what it is on your own. I'm afraid you're going to forget any of this ever happened in just a few minutes. Granny looked angry but didn't say anything. Shigaraki-san spoke, seemingly to the ceiling. Kurogyri, kindly transport Izuku and Ito-san to the train station. A black void opened up in the air beside them, and both Granny and Izuku gasped. No need to worry, Shigaraki told them both. You're both far too valuable to me at the moment to let any harm befall you. He firmly guided them into the void, and they were shocked to see the train station directly in front of them when they passed through the darkness. The void disappeared as their feet touched the pavement, and Izuku began to cry. He didn't understand any of this, and that Shigaraki man scared him. Let's get on the train, Granny told him. Everything will be all right. She guided him through the station and they got on the train. Izuku used the handkerchief Granny pressed into his hand to wipe his eyes and blow his nose. She patted his arm, and they rode in silence for a few minutes until Izuku nodded off for a moment, then woke with a start. Oh, sorry. I didn't think I was tired, but I just fell right asleep, he said to Granny, who was looking relieved. Are we almost there yet? I want to see if a store has the pen I want to buy for my dad for Christmas. It's the next stop, she told him, sounding shaky. They got off the train in a busy shopping district and headed toward a store that Izuku was interested in. He had made a little extra money from one of his neighbors, who had taken her dog to a groomer, then hated its new look. She had paid Izuku quite a bit just to pet her dog and make its hair grow back. Now with that, plus his other savings, he could afford to buy his dad a nice Christmas gift and get something for Granny Ito if he could find a way to get her something without her being there to spoil it. Izuku found the pen he'd wanted for his dad, the kind that wrote upside down or even underwater. While Granny Ito was busy looking at kimono obi for her daughter, Izuku managed to purchase a nice rail pass holder for her and hide it in the bag with his dad's pen. When they were mostly finished with their shopping, Izuku begged to go to a store that featured hero merchandise, and Granny Ito indulged him, as usual. There was a hoodie that he wanted to check the price on, but it was too high up on the wall for him to reach. Granny Ito wasn't much taller than him by this time, and she couldn't reach it either. Then, just when Izuku was up on his tiptoes trying to stretch for it, he felt his feet lift off the ground. Was all he could think to say as he rose toward the ceiling. Izuku! Granny Ito cried out, trying to grab him by the ankles. Luckily, Izuku had the presence of mind to grab a hold of one of the clothing racks jutting from the wall. Wah! Izuku said, looking down at the people looking up at him. Did someone use their quirk on me? Everyone shook their heads as he made eye contact with a couple of them inquiringly. I think you must have picked up something new, Granny Ito told him quietly. Izuku thought she must be right. The biggest problem with that is that he didn't know how to get down. With his other quirks, it was pretty much easy to manage. How was he supposed to manage this? Ma'am, your grandson can't use his quirk in here like that, an employee told Granny Ito, looking up at Izuku with mild annoyance. Izuku knew that quirk use in public was generally against the law, unless you couldn't help it. He's been having some trouble with his quirk, Granny told the lady. We're very sorry for the inconvenience. We'll try to get it under control. The employee looked somewhat skeptical. 8 years old was a little old to be having trouble controlling a quirk, but she shrugged. Izuku, try to use the slats on the walls to walk yourself down to the floor, Granny advised him. That made sense. Izuku fit his fingers into the grooves in the wall that the display bars were slotted into, and with some effort was able to get low enough for her to reach, so she could help him touch down. Now what? Izuku asked as people began to go about their business, now that the spectacle was over. I'm not really sure, Granny admitted, looking worried. She let him go, and he started to float upward again. She grabbed hold of him and pulled him back down. It was no real strain to do so, kind of like holding onto a large balloon. I don't want to take you outdoors until I'm sure you won't float away, she said. Or worse, get up in the air, then have it quit and you fall. Izuku didn't want that either. Is there something I can help you with? A voice asked from behind them. Izuku looked over to see a policeman standing there, looking curious, but not angry. Izuku said sheepishly. I don't know how to turn my quirk off. It's kind of new, and I just keep floating up in the air. You're a little old to just now be getting a quirk, the man said pointedly. I know, Izuku said nervously, but it's true. Granny let go of him for a moment, but Izuku stayed on the ground this time. It stopped, Izuku said with relief. Granny Ito still kept a firm grip on his jacket just in case. I'm glad to hear that, the officer said. Why don't the two of you come with me back to the Koban, for now? You're going to arrest us? Izuku asked, beginning to panic. No, of course not, the officer said with a laugh. We have information there about quirk counseling and agencies that might be able to help you learn how to control it. That could be helpful. Izuku looked to Granny to see what she thought they should do. I'm mostly concerned that this quirk will activate again while we're outside, and there won't be a ceiling to keep him from drifting away, she told the officer. That would be bad, he said, scratching his chin. How about we each take one of his hands while we walk, and if he starts to levitate at all, we can keep him grounded. That matter settled, they walked together down the road to a small building that wasn't even as big as Izuku's apartment. He sat down in a folding chair while the officer rummaged in a filing cabinet. Granny sat stiffly beside him, gripping her purse tightly in her lap. As they waited, Izuku looked around and suddenly he was airborne again. Wah, he said, feeling his butt leave the seat. Granny reached out and snagged his coat with her hand, stopping him from going any further. Izuku hung in the air, about 3 feet off the ground, feeling ridiculous as the policeman stood and walked over. I see what you mean, he said to Granny Ito. He's kind of like a human balloon. Granny nodded, and Izuku sighed. This was not how he envisioned his day going. It seemed strange that it was so late already, but the sun was setting quickly and the sky was starting to get dark. They needed to figure this out so he could go home and hide his dad's present before he got home. Let's try something, the policeman said. He took a large binder off of a shelf and held it up to Izuku. Try holding this. Izuku took the thick binder and felt himself sink toward the ground. The man handed him another, similar book, and Izuku was able to stand on his own without Granny holding on to him. That's better, the officer said with satisfaction. Now maybe you could explain why no one has figured this out before? Izuku nodded, and Granny sighed. Then Izuku explained about how his quirk worked, and ended with, and this one just showed up while we were shopping. I'll be damned, the officer said quietly, mostly to himself. Everyone says that, Izuku said glumly.